Apocalypse. I can steal superpowers. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 476. Armed. Humans have really created the blind armor? As a former member of the human race, Chihaya Kawahara naturally knew that in the past 100 years, there have indeed been many breakthroughs in the source energy inscription technology, but it is almost impossible to integrate them together. Blind armor? Perfect exoskeleton armor? What a joke. It's like the Iron Man in the science fiction movie. If that kind of armor is really created, do you know how many inventions need to be integrated? The requirements for various technologies are different, and the conflicts between them are sometimes a dead end. How could someone who can perfectly balance these technologies and finally cast them into shape be unknown? Ning Yiking, you know who she is. Fu Xining was not in a hurry to fight at this time. She just wanted to delay time, so she didn't care and threw out these useless information. She is the star spirit of this forest world, the master of the blade of heaven, Ji Rang. In fact, Ning Yiking is not good at fighting. Her talents and abilities are now in the field of source energy inscription technology. Although I'm her nominal master, the one who really taught her knowledge is actually our star dragon Lai, Xingming. As a star dragon that travels through the universe and shuttles through countless universes, her knowledge is not limited to this small world. Ning Yiking, the darling of this world, the messenger of Allah walking on the earth. She spent a full 10 years integrating the essence of human source inscription technology for thousands of years, and finally created an extraordinary technological exoskeleton power armor. Now, Ning Yiking is dead, and the Mingjia armor is her swan song and the last gift she left to the world. Fu Xining's expression seemed calm at this time, but her voice was trembling. As the watchers of the Noah Xingyuan Empire stationed in various worlds, they are all single. Because of the gaps in all aspects, it is difficult for them to find their true love. But on the contrary, these watchers, for the star spirits they raised with their own hands, really raised them as their own children. For Fu Xining, Ning Yiking's death was like her child's death in battle, and her inner grief was simply unstoppable. The reason why she did not die in battle was just to settle down His Excellency Crossing Ming's child. The blind armor is the most proud treasure in human history. It is the pearl that mankind has succeeded in after dozens of centuries of long research and creation. It is the sum of all human source energy technology to date. It represents the greatest wisdom of the human race. It has shape because of the arrival of source power. It has substance because of the excavation of the soul. And it was born because of the inscription. Its name is Blind Armor. The eighth apostle of the desolate god, Chihaya Kawahara. Since you want to peek into the essence of mankind, then one of the prototypes of the blind armor on me may give you a rough glimpse. At that moment, Fu Xining looked at the shocked expression on Chihaya Kawahara's face and a faint smile appeared on her face. She injected the last remaining source power into the blue ring all at once, completely suppressing all the chips. In the flashing stream of light, as if unlocked with a key, the monotonous ring instantly unfolded and enlarged, detached from Fu Xining's fingertips, and began to float upwards. The eighth apostle Kawahara Chihaya, it's an honor. You will die under the supreme scientific and technological achievements of mankind. At this time, the blue ring rose to a height of 10 meters above Fu Xining's head before stopping. Then Fu Xining's sarcastic voice sounded, and the ring seemed to be unfolded origami. From the initial point, it expanded into a huge ring. Then the light flow of the ring extended downward and became a cylinder surrounding Fu Xining. And then, the top of the cylinder opened like a box, and some kind of huge machine was released from the compressed space in the shocked eyes of the eighth apostle Kawahara Chihaya. The machine looked like a huge curled up falcon, and the inscriptions of frost lit up in every part of the machine, and the white cold air surrounded the machine, all of which showed its extraordinariness. This is the Myanjia Armed Forces? Kawahara Chihaya now secretly hated herself for not taking action earlier. Now Fu Xining was protected in the cylindrical source field shield, and it was too late to stop it. At this moment, Kawahara Chihaya could only secretly send a message to let her followers give up the roundup in other directions and speed up to come over. Sleeping season, cold wind and desolation. My Angia Armed Forces Winter Moon Breath. In the voice of Fu Xining's announcement, the integrated state of my Angia Armed Forces Winter Moon Breath began to descend along the cylindrical source field shield almost in the blink of an eye. The mechanical falcon-like mechanical armor reached the top of Fu Xining's back, and with the complete arrival of the huge machine, the cold air also spread, and the 8 black-clawed terror cats that were still trying to break through the source field shield instantly turned into ice sculptures. At this time, when Kawahara Chihaya was not paying attention, Fu Xining injected a tube of red medicine into his body. Almost as soon as the drug entered the blood, Fu Xining's cheeks began to turn red, and all the pain in his body quickly disappeared. The whole person even had a kind of comfortable pleasure. Deploy. With Fu Xining's sharp voice, this mechanical hook-shaped body, that seemed like an eagle, began to deform and crack. At this moment, countless pieced together steel parts, through the established civilian procedures, completed the process of transforming from a complete form to countless unfolded parts. That was a long predetermined trajectory. The left-right symmetrical mechanical parts began to fit on Fu Xining's body in turn, completing the patchwork and installation of the Mingjia armor. First, the mechanical weapons on the shoulders fit perfectly on Fu Xining's body and quickly completed the deployment. Then, the inscriptions on the shoulder mechanical weapons lit up, the source energy field shield expanded rapidly, and the anti-gravity levitation ability pulled Fu Xining into the air. Then, the first layer of mechanical armor of Mingjia armor began to fit on the girl's body. Left shoulder, left hand, left foot, right foot, chest, abdomen, waist, upper limbs, lower limbs, feet, all joints. Without Fu Xining's summons, the second level of armor of the Mingjia armor also quickly unfolded. Compared with the close-fitting nature of the first level of armor, the entire second level of armor is a true exoskeleton armor. The mechanical sound of teeth has an indirect and pleasant rhythm. After all the inscribed mechanical armors are fitted, the last circular mechanical wing on the back is also unfolded and quickly fixed on Fu Xining's back. Finally, the helmet descends. Full armor is deployed. Completed. Chapter 477 Breath of Winter Moon. Under the dim sunlight, a mechanical armor with an ice blue main color completely showed its own color on Fu Xining. The mechanical parts engraved with ice blue inscriptions fit perfectly on the girl one by one. The calm blue light lit up on the floating girl. The source energy inscription technology has a psychedelic color that ordinary people can't imagine. The breathtaking mechanical beauty can be described as ingenious. In the past 10 years, Ningyi has learned all the source energy inscription technologies that humans have, and in the process of mastering them, she has created a new peak. This external mechanical armor called Mingjia Armed was specially made by her to make up for the lack of her own ability and the gap in combat talent. In order to perfectly control the Mingjia Armed, the Xianji envoy needs to implant macro-mechanical cores in the bones of various parts of the body to obtain the sense of operation like an arm and a finger. Fu Xining believes in Ningyiking's ability, so she became the first experimenter without hesitation. The Mingjia Armed Winter Moon Breath was the prototype created by Ningyiking. After that, Ningyiking's exclusive Mingjia Armed had a performance far superior to Winter Moon Breath. However, Fu Xining's original power system was somewhat conflicting with the Mingjia Armed, and using it would reduce her combat effectiveness, so it became a backup. Breath of Winter Moon, maximum power. As Fu Xining resisted, an inaudible sound rang out, and then Fu Xining raised her head. The axles on both sides of the helmet rolled backwards, and the visor blocking her eyes flipped up, and then, the single wing-shaped decoration buckled at the back of the helmet flipped up, and all the inscriptions on the Mingjia armament suddenly increased to the maximum brightness. After putting on the Mingjia armament Breath of Winter Moon, Fu Xining, who has a slender figure, did not become bloated, but instead possessed a shocking beauty. The ice blue metal armor was angular, and the inscriptions that lit up on it looked gorgeous and mysterious. The inscriptions were not words, but a pattern that depicted the language of the soul. The entire set of Mingjia armament armed all parts of Fu Xining's body, without any omissions. The armor on the front is not particularly thick, about between light armor and heavy armor, but the armor on the back is thick and heavy, and the defense power can be known without confirmation, and it is absolutely difficult to break. Connected to the back is a ring-shaped pure white mechanical light wing, which is almost the same size as Fu Xining's entire body. It can be said that the largest part of this set of dark frame arms named Breath of Winter Moon is the back armament. The limbs of the dark frame armament, calves, feet, forearms, hands. These parts are obviously larger than one circle for combat effectiveness, but compared with the huge external machinery on the back, it is still much smaller. Every joint and turning part of the dark frame armament is inlaid with ice blue source crystals, and the ring-shaped light wing on Fu Xining's back has a lot of cyan source crystals, which is obviously to provide higher speed. As for the chest, it is a super large ice blue source crystal, and the surrounding of the source crystal is depicted as an abstract blizzard, as if representing an endless winter. The dark armor, named Breath of Winter Moon, is mainly ice blue, and the rest is pure white, as if it indicates frost and snow. At this moment, Fu Xining is no longer as weak as before. Wearing the dark armor, she is like a commander in uniform, with her beautiful face exposed, and a single piece of pure white metal wing unfolded on the left side of her helmet, making her look sharp and beautiful. The spherical source field shield like a glass bubble has been deployed around Fu Xining, forming a complete and thorough defense. Koahara, are you ready? It took only 10 seconds for Fu Xining to deploy Mingjie armament Breath of Winter Moon, and she was protected by the source energy field shield the whole time. This prevented Koahara on the other side from having any chance to attack. She watched Fu Xining put on the powerful armor, but was unable to stop her in time. The 8th Apostle Koahara, I vaguely remember that I found some information about you before. When you were at the peak of level 3 blue steel, you did not choose to fuse the source crystal of the Desolate Beast and become the Desolate God, Disaster Corpse Envoy. Instead, you fused a very special seed. Right? Fu Xining directly exposed Koahara's trump card in person. She looked at the solemn expression of the 8th Apostle and acted very indifferent. I'm really flattered to have the attention of someone like you. Koahara is no longer an ordinary human being. After going through so many things, there is no need to say more about her control over her mind. Now, since Fu Xining has shown her true strength, she can only fight. You're welcome. We have always been concerned about the apostles of Huanga and Shenming. At this time, Fu Xining, who was wearing the Mingjie armor, was estimated to be more than 2 meters tall, and the ring-shaped light wings on the back were more than 3 meters tall. Relying on the anti-gravity device of the Breath of Winter Moon, Fu Xining was easily suspended in the air and did not need to rely on the power of the ground at all. In Ningya King's design, the energy used by the Mingjie armor was all provided by the source crystal core. The Xianji Envoy itself did not need to consume any source power, and its continuous combat capability was extremely strong. Koahara was not a fool. After a period of scrutiny, she had discovered this situation. So Koahara understood more clearly the horror of the Mingjie armor. After all, it was the sum of all human source energy inscription technology. Every hour and every minute, countless people were pouring their efforts into it, and countless people were doing their best to make it a change. It is not perfect now, but it does not mean that it will not be perfect in the future. After countless human research and improvements, one day, its imperfections will be infinitely close to perfection. Heh, humans, what an ugly struggle. Why are you unwilling to destroy it? Koahara showed a sneer on her face, but then her expression gradually became firm. She will return double the pain and harm she suffered as a human to all human beings. As an apostle of Shenming, she will fulfill the will of Shenming. In this way, she will ascend to the highest. Human beings will be completely destroyed one day, and all she did was to advance this process. Fu Xining, if you still have the roots of a human, then let me see the ugliest struggle of mankind. The 8th Apostle, Koahara, gritted her teeth. She suddenly straightened her body, looking fiercely at Fu Xining in the air. Feel the glory, mortal. You will see my strongest follower. Chapter 478, Black Forest Fierce Ape. Woo-oh. 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 The fierce ape cry echoed in the forest, and the mountains in the distance suddenly trembled earth-shakingly, as if something huge was bombarding the ground. Fu Xining, who was wearing a black armor, raised his head. On the holographic screen, the approaching wild beast was clearly shown. It was a nearly 100-meter tall manic black ape. It used both hands and feet and rushed forward at an unstoppable speed. Countless trees were destroyed as it moved. But the Black Forest fierce ape didn't care about anything along the way. Its eyes were always forward, and it approached the eighth apostle, Chihayakoahara, at all costs. The Black Forest fierce ape. The adult body should be a wild beast of the V sub-gold level, but this one now, is it a special mutant? It actually reached the 6th gold level. On the virtual interface in front of Fu Xining, all the data of the Black Forest fierce ape was clearly seen. As a follower of Chihayakoahara, it was indeed worthy of the hope poured into it. The size of a V-level sub-gold beast is generally about 50 meters, but compared to the 100-meter standard of the 6th level gold beast, the difference is almost crushing and killing. Such a huge monster is very conspicuous in the woods of 20 to 30 meters high. GLUO, who was far away, also stopped and couldn't help looking over. Is this King Kong? GLUO looked at the fierce black giant ape and couldn't help but think of the famous big monster in the movie. But King Kong looked like a family, but this huge black ape had a bone shell piercing out of its body, and it looked murderous. It was not a good thing. Fu Xining. It's okay. GLUO was basically sure that Fu Xining must have been caught up by the enemy. She was so seriously injured that she might not be able to escape. Thinking of this, GLUO didn't dare to stay any longer. He hugged the sleeping crossing RUO and began to shuttle through the woods like flying. In order to survive, he must use all his strength and run as far as possible. GLUO's accelerated departure did not cause any impact on the actual battlefield. The huge ferocious ape quickly approached Fu Xining and the others. At this time, Fu Xining, wearing the Mingjia armor, looked like a grasshopper at the feet of the 6th level gold beast. But compared to the difference in size, Fu Xining's real combat power is not lower than that of the opponent. Winter Moon Breath Source Crystal Spear Blade. At that moment, Fu Xining urged the Mingjia armor to rise to a height of hundreds of meters. During the flight, she swung her right arm, and the additional part of the back armor began to unfold forward. In the orderly mechanical sound, the mechanical armor on Fu Xining's right forearm opened. The hidden weapon system was linked and spliced, and the crystal blade began to extend. When the weapon linkage was completed, the front half of the shoulder armor on the right arm also cut down to fix the weapon armor. In just 2 or 3 seconds, with the changes of various mechanical modules, a huge sword blade appeared in Fu Xining's hand. The length of the sword blade was more than 3 meters, with symmetrical outward half blades on the left and right sides, and the middle of the source crystal gun blade was hollow, as if a sword blade was split from the middle. However, in the center of the 2 blades, there was a suspended polyhedron source crystal. The ice blue source crystal floated, dyeing the 2 transparent blades blue. Ningyi King is worthy of the star spirit of this world. Her source inscription technology has reached the level of another dimension. The Mingjia armor she made is definitely the most perfect exoskeleton armor. With it, humans can use power beyond their own abilities. At this moment, Fu Xining, who was equipped with the source crystal gun blade, had his entire right arm armor covered with a larger weapon module, becoming 2 or 3 times larger. But Fu Xining felt as light as waving a matchstick. Boom. The speed of the Black Forest ape's approach was terrifying. It took it only 10 seconds to reach the distance of 2 or 3 kilometers. After all, it was a 6th level gold beast, and its strong body was basically not afraid of ordinary source crystal weapons. When the Black Forest ape arrived, Koahara Chihaya instantly jumped onto its arm, then ran up along the arm, and ran all the way to its shoulder. Black Forest ape, smash her. Koahara Chihaya was obviously confident in her followers, and after her order, the Black Forest ape pounded his chest, as if declaring war on the tiny figure in front of him. Roar. Amid the deafening ape roar, the Black Forest ape casually pulled up a towering tree and drew a residual image in the sky, as if swinging a baseball bat. It can be imagined that the tree, which was more than 30 meters high, showed some signs of bending when it was waving in the air. How much strength did it take? The strength was transformed into speed at the same time, and even made a whistle. But, facing this kind of attack, Fu Xining just dodged easily, and dodged the swing of the Black Forest ape in an instant. Then, Fu Xingning raised the source crystal gun blade in her hand, and the ice blue source crystal stones in the center of both gun blades lit up. The source crystal gun blade is 3 meters long, and the gap in the middle is about the width of the palm upright. The outward blades on both sides are a little wider, but at this time, the entire gun blade is dyed ice blue. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Following Fu Xingning's command to shoot, the network constructed by the mechanical core in her body began to convey information. In a time so small that it could not be measured, the command conveyed by the source power entered Fu Xingning's right arm. Then, the mechanical core that had been rooted in the bones converted the information into a command signal dedicated to the Mingjie armed forces. So the source crystal in the center of the gun blade quickly released energy and launched a bombardment. The speed of the entire transmission process was too fast to be measured. The reaction speed was far faster than human nerve reaction. Therefore, when people controlled the Mingjie armament, they even had a faster reaction speed than humans. There was no need for intervals. As long as the consciousness thought, the action was already made. Under Fu Xingning's command to launch the attack, the source crystal gun blade sent out a series of frost source energy bullets. Each bullet had a long tail. The orange-sized ones flew as fast as lightning. When the Black Forest Fierce Ape had not yet retracted its swing, 20 or 30 frost source energy bullets had hit it. Boom. 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 Although the frost energy bullet was only the size of an orange, when it exploded, it was an ice storm area the size of a round table. 20 or 30 frost source energy bullets exploded at the same time, and the cold breath spread. The superimposed ice source power actually froze the back of the Black Forest Fierce Ape's left shoulder blade into solid ice. However, the source power protection on the body of the 6th gold level wild beast has turned into a crystal-like state. These pieces of ice look terrifying, but in fact they have not even broken the defense. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 479 Natural Envoy. The ice shell created by the frost energy bomb was almost completely blocked by the source power protection. With the movement of the muscles and bones of the Black Forest Ape, the frozen ice layer broke apart and fell down with the crystalline source power protection. However, Fu Xingning's attack was not really for killing, but just to break the source power protection of the Black Forest Ape. She succeeded. Frost Ray. Fu Xingning is a veteran warrior. While urging the blind arm to move at high speed to avoid the attack of the Black Forest Ape, she shot out continuous frost rays, like a blue light band, attacking the left shoulder blade of the Black Forest Ape. It must be said that the huge body of 100 meters high does bring indescribable power and lethality, but at the same time, facing Fu Xingning who is moving at high speed, it feels like a gorilla hitting a mosquito. It's not that the Black Forest Ape reacts slowly, but Fu Xingning in the state of blind arm has too fast reaction speed and too fast movement speed. Frost rays are highly condensed frost source power. Under this terrifying freezing ability, any biological cell will be frozen instantly. This freezing is the complete death of cells, which is almost the same as cutting flesh directly from the body. It can be said to be the most terrifying enemy of all living things. If there is no source power defense, it only takes a few tens of microseconds for the organism to feel a chill under the effect of the frost source power. In essence, that piece of body tissue has completely severed its relationship with him. So at this time, the Black Forest Fierce Ape had to give up the random attack on Fu Xingning and cover the attacked part with his hands. But the Black Forest Fierce Ape was too strong. This struggle actually caused the frozen fur and a layer of flesh and blood to fall off, revealing the white bones inside. The blood could not stop flowing, and it looked extremely miserable. Raw. Feeling the flesh and skin of its shoulder blade falling off, the Black Forest Fierce Ape was enraged by the pain. It let out a high-pitched roar, and its eyes turned red. Fu Xingning, who succeeded, was not greedy. She directly pulled away for a distance, and flew to the side like a stream of light. At the same time, in order to save energy, the frost ray was replaced with a frost source energy bullet. The consumption of this bullet was very low. Fu Xingning did not intend to carry out effective killing, but just harassment and anger. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this time, the frost energy bullet in Fu Xingning's source crystal gunblade had no intention of stopping. The energy bullets with tails were just like free, attacking the wound of the Black Forest fierce ape densely. Facing this attack, the eighth apostle, Kawahara Chihaya, who was standing on the right shoulder of the Black Forest fierce ape, certainly could not fail to react. She flipped her palm, and a seed she took out from the space equipment fell into her palm. Kawahara Chihaya's source power attribute is natural, and the green mist and brilliance are almost perfect with the compatibility of plants and trees. It was precisely because of this possible miracle that Chihaya Kawahara did not choose to absorb the wild beast source crystal to become a 4th silver rank warrior a few years ago. She gave up the mediocre path of becoming a wild god, disaster corpse envoy, and chose a path that no one in this world has chosen. She merged a seed of a disaster plant into her body, and with this special seed, she successfully condensed her own source crystal and opened up a brand new path that had never been seen before in this world. She named it Revival, Nature Envoy. As a messenger of nature, Chihaya Kawahara has the power of miracles in nature. At that moment, Chihaya Kawahara injected the emerald source power into the red flower seed in her palm, and then threw it into the sky. Suddenly, the seed expanded rapidly in flight, and finally turned into a huge red flower bud in 1 or 2 seconds, and then the petals unfolded, but at the same time it exploded directly. Boom. The huge red flower bud exploded like a bomb when it bloomed, and the flame turned into a huge fireball, directly destroying all the frost source energy bombs that approached. At the same time, the remaining high temperature formed a half-moon shaped area like an umbrella, which not only blocked Fu Xingning on the other side, but also made her energy bullets lose their bravery. After dealing with the energy bullets flying all over the sky, Kawahara Chihaya clenched her left hand and injected pure natural energy into a withered yellow seed. Then, the seed began to expand like rubber, and she threw the seed accurately into the wound on the left shoulder of the Black Forest ape. Once it came into contact with flesh and blood, the yellow seed began to grow rapidly. Under the nourishment of natural energy, it grew thousands of times faster than normal. The vines took root in the flesh and blood of the Black Forest ape, and then grew more and more. Finally, the huge wound of the Black Forest ape with a diameter of 10 meters was completely covered by the vines, and the wound no longer bled, and the pain disappeared. Troublesome mosquito. Kawahara Chihaya looked at Fu Xingning flying in the air, and her heart was extremely irritated. As a 6th golden rank realm warrior, it was not that she could not fly in the air, but that would consume a huge amount of source power, which is a huge burden for a battle of the same rank. Lifting off into the air means a decisive battle. But now, let alone victory, Kawahara Chihaya has a hard time even holding on. After all, her follower is a 6th level gold level wild beast that is invincible on the ground, but facing creatures in the sky, the Black Forest fierce ape has some embarrassing situations where he has no place to use his strength. What's more troublesome is that frost source power belongs to combat source power, but natural source power is auxiliary, and healing source power, which are 2 different concepts. Kawahara Chihaya is strong because she has milk and summon beasts, and she is invincible in consumption, but if she really fights head on, she is probably looking for death. Have you ever seen a summoner give up his summoned beast and go to fight a warrior in melee? That's not asking for a beating. The most disgusting thing is that Fu Xingning can now fly in the air recklessly. Fu Xingning's own source power has been exhausted, but the energy center of Mingjie Armed seems to be a heavenly source crystal, and the energy can be said to be unlimited. Fu Xingning, who was wearing the Mingjie armor, not only had the energy field shield around him infinitely activated, but also floated in the air infinitely, and his movements were gorgeous and smooth. Was he fighting or showing off his flying skills? Damn it. We can only fight a war of attrition. Under the absolute disadvantage, Kawahara Chihaya didn't even think about rushing up to fight Fu Xingning, and simply let the Black Forest fierce ape do his best to defend and see what the opponent can do first. Black Forest fierce ape, give up the attack, and do your best to defend. Following Kawahara Chihaya's order, the Black Forest fierce ape's own natural energy rose, lingering around his body, and his body was also made of crystallized energy to form armor, and it became thicker and heavier. When the Black Forest Fierce Ape fully deployed the energy protection, Fu Xingning also stopped the useless bullet attack. Chapter 480 Barrage Bombing. The 6th Golden Rank Black Forest Ape, after giving up its ability to attack and using all its source power for defense, was really tough. Fu Xingning tried to attack several times, but all of them were ineffective. On the contrary, this mosquito-like offensive ability completely angered the Black Forest Ape. The Black Forest Ape was huge in size and its strength was its strong point, but it did not have any long-range attack means. It was good at close combat, and was very helpless in the face of flying creatures. With no other options, it actually began to pull up various trees like pulling weeds, and threw them in the direction of Fu Xingning. Boom. 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 The Black Forest Ape hammered its chest angrily, and then completely transformed into a forest destroyer. It pulled up trees that had grown for who knows how many years, and threw them into the sky like throwing toothpicks. Fu Xingning, who was in a state of armed, floated in the sky, facing countless trees flying towards her. She just used simple movement and deflection to perfectly avoid these ridiculous attacks. As a king-level wild beast on land, the Black Forest Fierce Ape can only jump up and down in anger when facing an enemy in the air. What's more annoying is that it has thick skin and flesh and is not very afraid of attacks of ordinary power. Mingjia Barrage Bombing. After dodging a bunch of projectiles, Fu Xingning hovered in the air. Then she touched her fists on her chest, and the system of the Mingjia armed clearly sensed her order. Then, the back armor of the Breath of Winter Moon quickly flipped to both sides, and hundreds of miniature frost source crystal missiles revealed their hideousness. Swish, 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 swish. At that moment, more than 100 miniature frost source crystal missiles rose from the back armor of the Mingjia armed Breath of Winter Moon. After rising, they made countless U-shaped turns, and under the impetus of source energy, they turned into countless notes of destruction. Boom. In midair, a towering tree thrown by the Black Forest Fierce Ape was hit by a miniature frost missile. The ice blue source crystal dust instantly scattered and exploded. The tree that 3 people hugged was directly blown to pieces, and every piece of debris was completely frozen. The bullets fired by the source crystal gunblade of the Winter Moon Breath are source energy bullets, which are meteor bombs that consume the source power in the source crystal. But the source crystal missile is completely different from this energy bomb. To be precise, the source crystal missile and the source crystal bomb have the same nature. The ammunition they explode is actually source crystal dust, which is to grind the source crystal into fine dust. When the fuse explodes, every tiny particle of the source crystal dust will instantly explode in a chain reaction. This terrifying source force explosion is not just a simple source force bombardment. The source force characteristics of different source crystals also follow closely. It can be said to be a terrifying weapon that attacks at the same time. The sky-high macrosource crystal missiles collided with the trees thrown by the Black Forest Ape. Countless flying huge trees were instantly blown into pieces. Each macrosource crystal missile could easily crush a large tree, and the remaining missiles continued to move forward. At that moment, in the horrified sight of Koahara, half of the remaining macrosource crystal missiles fell from the sky. This is not an attack. This is destruction. Koahara almost turned around and jumped off the Black Forest Ape the moment she saw the first large tree being destroyed by the source crystal missile. Before leaving, she also issued an order: protect your head with both hands and squat down with your head in your arms. All the source power is fully deployed, and all defenses are used. It's not that Koahara doesn't want to launch other methods, but the time is too short, and it's too late. At this time, Fu Xingning was flying at an altitude of about 120 meters in the air, and only more than 200 meters away from Koahara. When the macrosource crystal missile was launched, this distance was almost reached in an instant. As a revival natural user, her main means of combat is to use natural source power to produce various disaster plant seeds. These disaster plants all have special abilities. After growing rapidly, the huge amount of natural source power will strengthen their special effects. Of course, even if this process is short, it still takes time. But at such a close distance, if Koahara hesitates a little longer, she will be bombed into slag by more than 50 macrosource crystal missiles. After Koahara hid, the Black Forest Fierce Ape heard the master's order and immediately began to execute it. It stopped pulling the tree and directly squatted down with a headshot. Koahara originally wanted to keep a distance, but the world was urgent, so she simply ran under the Black Forest Fierce Ape. In a hurry, she ordered it to lie directly on the ground and curl up its body. Then the barrage bombing came. The cost of each Macrosource crystal missile is the price of 10 years of hard work for an ordinary person, and the bombing of 50 macro missiles at the same time is no longer an attack, but a show off with a lot of money. Boom. 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 The first Macrosource crystal missiles approached, one after another, hit the source power protection around the Black Forest Ape, and the frost source crystal dust exploded in a chain reaction under the action of the fuse. At the same time, the inscribed metal shell of the missile also opened backwards with the momentum, deliberately adjusting the direction of the source crystal dust explosion, pouring all the terrifying source power explosion into the circular area, centered on the missile hit point. Each Macrosource crystal missile contains twice the weight of 4th silver level source crystals, although it looks not much bigger than fireworks such as double kick firecrackers. But in fact, the power of the source power explosion it produces can almost cover the entire distance within 100 meters in diameter. Of course, the power in the center is the greatest, and there will be attenuation outside the edge. But even so, the power is still astonishing, or it is precisely because of this small scale damage that the power is more concentrated. The source power protection of the Black Forest Ape was indeed extraordinary. The first batch of Macrosource crystal missiles all exploded. Each explosion made the Black Forest Ape tremble all over. The thick cloud-like source power protection was also quickly consumed, but it never broke through the defense. But Fu Xining did not stop. She opened the back armor of the Mingjie armor again, and fired the second batch of 100 Macrosource crystal missiles. Boom. 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 The source power lingered around the 100-meter tall Black Forest Ape. Those Macrosource crystal missiles exploded in the clouds, blasting the cumulus clouds apart. The dark green natural source power gradually became thinner, but the terrifying explosions continued, and the crystal-like source power protection began to crack. Boom. 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 The explosion of the first 50 Macrosource crystal missiles did not defeat the source power protection of the Black Forest Ape. But never forget that this is not a few, but dozens, hundreds. The second batch of arriving Macrosource crystal missiles directly formed a terrifying barrage, pouring down on the Black Forest Ape like a rainstorm. Chapter 481 The Victory of Money. In the broken woodland, the explosion of source power was deafening. The freezing effect of frost source power caused white frost fog to appear around. Whether it was trees, or soil and rocks, they were directly frozen into ice lumps. Raw. Finally, after more than 100 Macrosource crystal missiles exploded, the source power protection of the Black Forest Ape was completely destroyed, and the remaining 30 or 40 Macrosource crystal missiles all exploded in its fur. The suffocating source power explosion roared, and the fur and flesh of the Black Forest Ape instantly shattered. But, the bombardment of missiles continued, and the continuous source power explosions began to penetrate its body. In just a dozen seconds, the huge black ape, which was 100 meters tall, fell down under the explosion of Macrosource crystal missiles. The broken bones and internal organs splattered with blood, but they were soon frozen again and completely turned into ice. Now, judgment. Fu Xining no longer considered what happened next at this time, and directly released the third batch, which was also the last remaining more than 100 Macrosource crystal missiles. Raw. At this time, the source power protection of the Black Forest Ape had been completely destroyed. The suffocating source power explosion roared on its body, and its fur and flesh fell apart. The ice layer stretched between its bones. In the continuous missile bombardment, the source power explosion began to penetrate its body. The Black Forest Ape, which could be called the overlord of one side on Earth, fell down in the explosion of the Macrosource crystal missile. Its bones and internal organs splattered with blood, but they were soon frozen by the frost source power. After a long time, the terrifying Macrosource crystal missile barrage finally ended. Koahara crawled out from under the Black Forest Ape. She turned her head and looked at her family, and the whole person was about to cry. It was too miserable. The Black Forest ape, which was more than 100 meters tall, now had only half of its skin left. Its internal organs and bones were blown to pieces, and it was completely frozen into ice. It was a miserable death. Koahara Chihaya really wanted to say that humans were too unethical. The Black Forest fierce ape did not die under the attack of the source power, but died under the rain of money. That was not an ordinary attack, it was money. To be honest, it was not that the 6th gold level wild beast Black Forest fierce ape was too weak, but since this kind of macrosource crystal missile was expensive, it certainly had its due effect. More than 300 macrosource crystal missiles were poured out in 1 minute, directly killing a 6th gold level wild beast. In total, the direct economic consumption was the salary of more than 300 urban white-collar workers for 10 years. The direct economic cost was about 800 million. Fu Xining, this dog thing who was about to die, was simply crazy and inhumane. Koahara Chihaya looked at the corpse of the wild beast that had accompanied her for a long time, and hated herself more than ever for being a revival natural user. In the final analysis, the natural source power was indeed too weak in combat. Although it had the characteristics of strong healing and recovery, facing the rich bombing of Fu Xining, the Xianji user, it was really very despairing. Koahara Chihaya, you underestimate the power of humans. At this time, Fu Xining, who had launched a terrifying barrage of macrosource crystal missiles and killed the Black Forest ape, was still floating in the air calmly. She looked at Koahara Chihaya who had crawled out from under the Black Forest ape's body. There was no change, but she swung the source crystal gun blade on her right arm back, ready to launch at any time. Asshole. Koahara Chihaya looked up and looked at Fu Xining who was leisurely in the air, and the hatred in her heart almost exploded. To be honest, facing Fu Xining flying in the air, Koahara Chihaya hated that she didn't have a flying wild beast, although even if she had a flying wild beast, she would be beaten by Fu Xining's Mingjia armor. But that wouldn't be so aggrieved. After all, this was a completely unequal battle. Although all of Fu Xining's power sources now came from the Mingjia armor, her combat experience was still there, and she had an extremely accurate grasp of the situation. What's even more abominable is that the Mingjia armor is completely built with money. Even if Ning Yiking, that abominable human, died, he left behind such a troublesome thing. The Mingjia armor on Fu Xining is estimated to weigh at least 10 tons, but this exoskeleton armor that transcends the times is definitely several times more expensive than the same weight of gold. Each of its weapons may be the result of hundreds or thousands of people's years of hard work. It can be said that what Koahara Chihaya is facing now is not a Fu Xining, but the hard work of the entire human race in the source energy inscription technology, as well as the great wisdom accumulated over decades and hundreds of years. I was careless. Koahara Chihaya now has to admit that she really underestimated the source energy inscription technology of humans. Ning Yiking really created a treasure that can change the situation of the war. But fortunately, the cost of the Mingjia armor is extremely high, and the possibility of mass production is not great. Ning Yiking was also killed by her Shenming, and lost the ability to continue to disgust her. At this time, Chihaya Koahara, the 8th apostle of the desolate god, had to admit that the armed forces of the darkness was indeed the greatest crown in human history. It was the embodiment of countless collectives in a race, their union, pursuit, and research. It shone because of human wisdom, and became stronger because of humans' endless pursuit. The 8th apostle of the desolate god, it's your turn now. Fu Xining looked at Chihaya Koahara's hesitation. On the one hand, she felt disdain for the combat power of the 8th apostle, and on the other hand, she really admired Ning Yiking's wisdom. Ning Yiking's death was really a huge loss to the world. The human race might have fallen into a low ebb because of her death. Chihaya Koahara, the time for playing is over. Under the effect of the medicine in her body, Fu Xining not only did not feel weak, but became more and more energetic. She was as excited as if she was eager to fight, as if the last blazing burning. At that moment, Fu Xining raised his right hand and raised the source crystal gun blade. Under the push of the ring light wings, he disappeared in an instant. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Just like the bullets in the barrage game, under Fu Xining's control, the frost source energy bounced at the center of the source crystal gun blade, almost turning into a straight line. The frost source crystal, that does not require any cooling, has become the best launch carrier. When Fu Xining's figure passed by, countless bullets began to fly towards the position of Koahara Chihaya. Playing, "You really underestimate me." At this time, Koahara Chihaya almost broke her teeth. She really didn't expect that Fu Xining would express such an attitude, simply treating her as nothing. "Do you think the apostles of the desolate god are pigs and dogs? Killing them as you say is too arrogant. It's just courting death." Although she was sent out in a hurry and was not fully awakened, she still stayed at the peak of the 6th gold level, but she is not a human being. Don't underestimate her. Chapter 482 Watch and Wait. Facing Fu Xining's contemptuous tone, the insulted emotion in her heart made Koahara Chihaya completely give up the idea of pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger. Of course, facing the barrage of frost energy bullets that gathered into a line, Koahara Chihaya did not have a hot head and head, but chose to evade temporarily. In just a few minutes of fighting, Koahara Chihaya has summed up some rules for fighting with the Mingjia armed forces. The first and most important one is, never underestimate the opponent's attack ability. In the short few minutes of fighting with Fu Xining, Koahara Chihaya deeply experienced the tragedy of arrogance. When you think that these energy bullets of your opponent pose no threat to you, and you only need to use the energy to block them at will, you are completely passive. As long as you stop, the muzzle of the Mingjia armed forces will perfectly lock your position, and the subsequent attack will be truly overwhelming. This kind of human creation does not pay attention to the consumption of energy, and the weapons produced by the energy inscription technology are all deadly things. Because of the deep understanding of this terrible firepower output, Koahara Chihaya disappeared from the spot at the first time. Frost energy bullets rained down on her. Koahara Chihaya turned around and jumped onto a tree. Then she left the spot in the blink of an eye along the branches and jumped onto another tree. In the chaotic cover, the orange-sized source energy bullets hit the branches and leaves of the trees and followed Koahara Chihaya's figure all the way forward. Koahara Chihaya's speed was extremely fast. She would never stay anywhere for half a second, and wherever she went, there would be dense forests. She would not give Fu Xining in the air an advantage in height, but let the dense forest become her advantage. The orange-sized blue source energy bullet dragged a little tail and collided with the branches and leaves of the trees while moving forward. Then it exploded, and the yellowed branches and leaves suddenly turned into fragments. Compared with the unconditional huge destructiveness of the source crystal missile, the frost source energy bullets emitted by the source crystal gun blade are not very lethal to non-living objects. But on the other hand, this kind of bullet has the lethality to quickly kill all living cells, and it has no entity. The speed of occurrence is extremely fast, and there is no danger of exploding. The orange-sized bullet has an effective area of about 1 meter in diameter. After the frost source power explodes, while the frost source power explodes with freezing effect, source power vibration also occurs. What's even more amazing is that if the frost source energy bullet attacks a point in a row, the influence of the frost source power will be continuously superimposed. When the freezing index of the hit object reaches a critical point, this shock force will make it shatter and be shaken into slag. This effect can be said to be an effective killing of non-living objects. From a practical perspective, the armor-piercing and penetration capabilities of a single frost source energy bullet may not be as strong as those of a solid supported source crystal bullet. However, when the frost source power bullet comes into contact with anything, whether it is flesh and blood or steel, it will be directly frozen. Under freezing, the physical properties of all these things become hard and brittle. The shock force generated by the source energy explosion will completely shatter this surface, causing the bullet's hit point, whether it is a person or an object, to explode with ice slag. The scene of this terrifying killing power is like this now. Koahara Chihaya ran away without looking back, and the frost energy bullets kept predicting her landing point and attacking. Everything within the effective range of 1 meter of bullets was directly blown to pieces. At this time, in order to track Koahara Chihaya, Fu Xining had to lower herself from mid-air and monitor Koahara Chihaya's trajectory at a low altitude. The dense forest affected her vision. If a warrior at the peak of the 6th gold level really ran, it would be impossible for human vision to capture. Bang, bang, bang. In a few dozen seconds, the positions of the two people flashed across several kilometers. Their speed was very fast, and everything along the way was blown into ice slag. The frost energy bullets of the source crystal gunblade had already fired more than 5,000 rounds. The continuous bullets did not give Koahara any breathing time, but this was just suppression. Or in other words, it was deceleration. During the pursuit, Fu Xingning turned her body and instantly passed between two trees. Then the mechanical wings behind her suddenly opened, and the 24 energy crystal cannons hidden in them flashed at the same time. Midnight frame energy barrage. Energy shells the size of lead balls flew out one by one. 24 energy shells directly cleared the area within 100 meters of the landing point. The shockwave effect produced by AoE even made the ground tremble for a moment. At the same time, the energy bullets fired by the crystal gun blades were still as free as before. The terrifying huge amount of bullets gathered into a violent storm. However, Koahara still dodged such a net-like attack. In the vast forest, the hard trees seemed to have become plastic, and it was plastic in the cold winter, more brittle than paper. Koahara ran away all the way, even faster than Fu Xingning. It must be said that Fu Xingning's previous judgment of the Mingxia armament still underestimated this cross-era creation. Because she was conceited about her own strength, she did not have much contact with this crystallization of Ning Yiking's wisdom. This also caused her awkwardness in control. Although the overall offensive seemed continuous, it was actually very unfamiliar. However, even so, Fu Xingning finally achieved the effect of a thorn in the tarsal bone. Not only did she stare at Koahara all the way, but she also constantly predicted her position, forcing Koahara to change direction and fear. At this point in the battle, the scene seemed to have become one-sided, with Fu Xingning chasing, and Koahara running away. But the fact, is it really so? As the 8th apostle of the desolate god, Koahara definitely has a trump card that ordinary people can hardly imagine. Both sides on the battlefield are very clear that Koahara's current escape is not really incapable of counterattack, and can even be regarded as a strategic lure. Koahara's powerful mental power has long sensed everything Fu Xingning did in the sky. Because of this, Koahara's escape seemed thrilling, but in fact, she didn't suffer any injuries at all. Energy, is it really infinite? Koahara dodged the continuous frost energy bullets while changing her path to avoid the explosion range of the energy shells. This time delaying method may seem unfavorable, but don't forget that Fu Xingning, who is in the state of armed, has a source energy field shield deployed around him. This all-round protection like a glass bubble takes a lot of time to break, but it also consumes a lot of energy. As long as a source energy field shield exists, Fu Xingning can be immune to almost any attack, but the source energy field shield continues to be deployed, and the energy consumed every hour and every minute is extremely terrifying. Invincible defense, of course, there is a huge price. Chapter 483 Winter's Rest. Therefore, Koahara was waiting, or rather, testing and observing. She did not want to waste useless source power to break the source power field shield around Fu Xingning first, but wanted to delay time and wait until Fu Xingning ran out of energy to kill him with one blow. However, the time when the energy ran out was much later than Koahara thought. After more than 10 minutes of chasing and escaping, the two of them almost skipped 40 or 50 kilometers, but Fu Xingning's attack never stopped, and the source power field shield around her body showed no signs of disappearing. Koahara was full of confidence at the beginning, but gradually began to doubt herself. Could it be that the human named Ning Yiking found a technology that could solidify the source power field shield and solve the problem of huge source power consumption? Or in other words, the breath of winter moon and the armored frame has nearly infinite source power. Koahara, are you just going to run away like a rat? Fu Xingning had seen through Koahara's plan, but she was not in a hurry at all. She just spent time with the other party while driving Koahara in the opposite direction of Jialuo's departure. From the beginning to the end, Fu Xingning wanted to delay enough time. As long as Jialuo and crossing Ruo left safely, that would be enough. However, at this time, Fu Xingning used fighting as training, and gradually became familiar with the control of the Mingxia armament. She was even a little eager to try it. Today, she will definitely die here, so why can't she kill Koahara Chihaya, the 8th apostle, before she dies? Swish, 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 boom. The source energy bullets fired by the source crystal gunblade have already formed a straight line, and the 24 source energy crystal cannons between the mechanical wings have been firing continuously, bombarding a messy forest recklessly. However, Fu Xingning was also very clear that her continuous attack seemed to absolutely suppress the situation, but in essence it was just a fireworks display. Koahara Chihaya's behavior of dragging time was really shameless. She didn't even fight back, but just ran away, and her running speed was terrifying. Koahara Chihaya, you, the 8th apostle, really embarrassed your Shenming. I'm a dying man, but I beat you so hard that you ran away. Wouldn't your Shenming be angry with your performance? Fu Xingning mocked Koahara Chihaya, who could only run away. She suddenly stopped attacking and turned her mind to flying. Then, a roaring sonic boom sounded, and Fu Xingning's low altitude flying speed suddenly increased by more than double and disappeared directly on the spot. Fu Xingning, you are looking for death. Koahara Chihaya was suppressed and beaten all the way, and she was already full of anger. At this time, Fu Xingning ignited the fire, and Koahara Chihaya exploded directly. She suddenly stopped and stopped running. She turned her hand and pinched a bronze seed in her palm. The emerald green source power was not stingy and was gradually injected into the seed. At this time, Fu Xingning, who had already controlled the Mingjie arm to rise into the sky, turned around and deflected in the sky, from rushing forward to drawing circles on the spot at a high speed. At the same time, Fu Xingning raised her right arm, and the source crystal gunblade dyed an ice blue was raised directly downward. At this moment, Fu Xingning no longer thought about continuing to test or delay time. She didn't care about the result at all, and just charged without hesitation. The Mingjie core in Fu Xingning's chest also started to operate at full capacity at this time. The icy source power was drawn out like a whale sucking, and all of it was injected into the source crystal gunblade. The source crystals in the center of the two blades also lit up quickly, and they were spinning at high speed in the suspension. The visible frost source power gathered in the center of the blades, as if it was a storm that distorted the snowfield in the sky. The icy blue source power was breathtakingly beautiful, but the terrifying aura in it also penetrated people's bones. Dark Frame Winter's pen. At that moment, as Fu Xingning declared, she drew a heavy stroke of the source crystal gunblade in her hand from the lower left to the upper right. It was like a brush covered with ink, with a sharp pen tip, writing wantonly on the spread paper. As Fu Xingning swung and slashed, the source power guided by the source crystal gunblade also gathered into an icy blue source power streamline. In the woods, everything was like a piece of white paper laid flat on the table, and then a brush drew a stroke diagonally from the lower left to the upper right. Not only was there a thick gully, but what was even more terrifying was that the ink of the brush spread on the white paper, dyeing both sides of the pen tip. Chihaya Koahara felt the terrifying momentum most clearly. She burst out all her source power and tried her best to avoid the attack. What she saw was an extended source power line sweeping down. Where the source power line hit, the ground was blasted into gullies by the source power, and then everything was frozen into ice. Chihaya Koahara's previous preparations were perfectly responded to at this time. The bronze seeds turned into a huge shield, resisting the attack of the source power line. However, before Chihaya Koahara could react, the path swept by the source power line actually produced a second explosion. Obviously, the source power sweeping like a pen tip did not attack Chihaya Koahara, but the gullies that tore the ground. A terrifying cold air broke out, directly swallowing Chihaya Koahara. Fu Xingning watched Chihaya Koahara being swallowed by the erupting white frost mist, but still did not relax his mind, but continued to attack without hesitation. Because at this time, the winter breath pen extended from the source crystal gunblade in Fu Xingning's right hand was still continuing. No one could imagine how much source power was consumed to create such a magnificent scene. The ice blue source power flowline could actually continue stably, as if it had really turned into a paintbrush. How could Fu Xingning waste such a terrifying source power output? Her figure flew across the sky at a high speed, and the huge frozen source power flowline kept cutting and sweeping where Koahara Chihaya was. The vast forest was suffering from the frozen sweep. the route where the source power flow line moved, not to mention the trees and grass stems. Even the stones were instantly frozen solid and then shattered under the source power shock. At a height of 100 meters, the source crystal gun blade in Fu Xining's hand seemed to have turned into a real paintbrush. She arbitrarily altered everything on the ground, turning the lush and dense forest into a bare, pothole-like white land. It was indeed a white land, because frost and snow covered everything, and ice mist filled the air, making the sunlight reflect beautiful colors. For 3 minutes, Fu Xining wantonly squandered the source power of the winter moon breath, turning the surrounding 2 or 3 kilometers of terrain into an ugly white area. When Fu Xining stopped the energy output of the source crystal gun blade, the ground was already as silent as death. Chapter 484 Calculation. Hiding? Fu Xining certainly would not be so foolish as to think that she could kill the 8th apostle of Huang Yun Shenming with just a tentative attack. Although from the beginning to the end, Kuwahara Chihaya had been holding the idea of not fighting head on, but when she really fought hard, she would definitely not be defeated so easily. Kuwahara Chihaya, come out, don't hide anymore. Fu Xining had activated all the search modules of the Mingjie armament, but no trace of Kuwahara Chihaya was found in either source detection, mental perception, or even sound wave tracing. Just delaying time like this? Fu Xining was a little confused about Kuwahara Chihaya's plan. She was considering whether she should lower her altitude, but suddenly, an emergency reminder interface popped up. Detected as an unknown macro-living body. Fu Xining reacted almost instantly. She accelerated directly to the safest altitude, but as soon as she moved forward, fireworks exploded in the sky. At some point, dandelions like clouds floated around Fu Xining. They were so tiny that they were barely bigger than a needle, and the small umbrella that rose into the air even achieved a translucent effect. However, the power of the explosion of these dandelions illuminated the sky for half a day, densely packed and endless. Boom boom boom. Under the control of Chihaya Kuwahara, countless dandelions surrounded Fu Xining, and the power generated by their chain explosions directly shattered the source energy field shield that protected Fu Xining. Fortunately, the armor of the Mingjie armed forces was strong enough and did not hurt Fu Xining, but the explosion effect also pressed her down from the sky. Then, a huge withered vine like a claw came from deep underground, and then like a horn, dense withered vines drilled out from the ground and grabbed the falling Fu Xining. It looked like countless withered vines formed a cocoon with Fu Xining as the center, and they were wrapped up one by one to form a huge sphere. On the ground, a huge branch broke out of the ground, and then the front of the branch cracked, revealing Kuwahara Chihaya inside. Recalling the clawvine prisoner, Kuwahara Chihaya calmly walked out of the tree branch. She raised her palm and squeezed it hard. The vine prison that bound Fu Xining suddenly tightened, as if to crush the things inside. Fu Xining, it's over. Kuwahara Chihaya had a calm smile on her face. Natural source power flowed along her soles and continued to flow into the ground. Claw vines rose from the ground one by one, constantly wrapping up the prison that wrapped Fu Xining and strangled her even more tightly. Although this claw vine looks ugly, its toughness is comparable to steel. After Kuwahara Chihaya's transformation, it has become resistant to source power, and its lethality is not just tightening. Recalling the dead vine piercing, Kuwahara Chihaya slapped a claw vine beside her with her palm, and the source power containing the breath of the soul not only began to give birth to the claw vine, but also brought her order to the ground. Then, the huge rattan bull began to grow thorns, like a sharp blade piercing from the inside to the outside. Fu Xining, I have tolerated you for a long time. Really? A seemingly indifferent answer sounded, and Kuwahara Chihaya's face changed, and she hurriedly increased the injection of source power. However, everything was too late, because at that moment the frost flow named Winter Breath Pen appeared again, and this time, it was full of combat power, nearly twice as strong as before. Obviously, Fu Xining was just holding back, waiting for the moment when Kuwahara Chihaya's body was exposed. So, the white streamline cut the large rattan bull with a diameter of 1 kilometer like a giant sword splitting the mountain, and then the giant blade with frost spread swept down, forcing Kuwahara Chihaya to avoid the edge. But Fu Xining obviously anticipated this moment, and her reaction speed was even faster than Kuwahara Chihaya. It must be said that Fu Xining's speed was too fast. She broke through the speed of sound, holding the source crystal gun blade, and flew directly to the front of Koahara, sweeping across like a cold wave. Facing the attack from the front, Koahara had no time to drill into the ground and could only rise into the sky at the fastest speed, but Fu Xingning was just trying to force her to take off. Because, in the air battle, Fu Xingning has the advantage of crushing Koahara. In the calculation and coercion, Koahara was like a mouse trapped in a prison, and the seemingly endless source power was used to support Fu Xingning's skill called Winter Breath Pen. Although Koahara avoided the sweeping of the ground, flying in the sky consumes a lot of source power, and she is obviously at a passive disadvantage. Must return to the ground. Plants grow by taking root in the soil. Koahara was also very decisive. When the pen of winter breath swept over again, she resisted the source power protection and fell to the ground like a meteor. It was only 2 or 3 seconds of contact. In order to resist the damage of the pen of winter breath, Koahara had to consume a lot of source power. The situation at this time was also subtle. Fu Xingning's source power swept across, freezing a large area, and all the claws and vines that drilled out of the ground were cut off. Wherever frozen, trees, grass, and stones had long turned into ice powder, leaving nothing bare. Koahara stood on the flat ground and kept moving, but it was difficult to sneak into the ground because of Fu Xingning's pressing attack. As Koahara moved and dodged, she had to pass through a piece of area that had been frozen by the source power streamline. Her speed of travel was very fast. Not to mention ordinary people, even low-level warriors could only see a shadow flashing by. But when Koahara stepped on the ground that she thought was frozen solid, an unexpected accident happened. Normally, the soil in winter will be frozen to the hardness of cement, and there will be no problem for a person to step on it. But Koahara did not expect that Fu Xingning would use this loophole to set a trap. While the winter pen was freezing everything, the source force vibration was also destroying everything. When the ground was completely frozen, the source force vibration had already destroyed its structure. In addition, Fu Xingning could set up a booby trap at any time, and Koahara was caught. The 8th apostle, who had not yet completed his awakening, felt like he was stepping on a lake that was only frozen on a thin layer. The booby trap exploded, the soil layer collapsed, and Fu Xingning's trap was fully deployed. The abnormal suction made Koahara feel like he was stepping into a swamp and fell into it. At such a high speed, the imbalance of the body is a fatal crisis. Koahara's body was pulled down by the suction, and Fu Xingning's frost streamline swung diagonally like a long whip. Koahara had no time to stop her body, but she reacted quickly and spun her body decisively, turning directly into a gyroscope in the air. Then Koahara slapped the ground with her right hand, and the emerald energy seeped in, directly erasing the trap that Fu Xingning had set, while stabilizing the collapsed soil structure. Chapter 485 Root Growth. At this time, the ground under Koahara's palm seemed to have turned into a stone slab. Through the soil layer stabilized by her source power, it sank more than half a meter. She used this layer to pull up the ground within 10 meters like a tile, and blocked it in front of her. The next second, the streamline of frost slashed down diagonally, and the 1 meter thick soil layer was directly cut open. The incision was as smooth as ice, but Koahara had already disappeared on the spot. Arsehole. Koahara's figure appeared on a tree trunk more than 10 meters away. She straightened her body with a solemn expression. Fu Xingning, who had been staring at her, was like a thorn in the flesh, sweeping the winter breath pen that was scribbling on the forest wantonly. Koahara, who had no intention of holding back, had no idea of dodging at this time, because in the constant escape, she knew that she would definitely be caught in a mistake and there would definitely be an accident. Facing such a tyrannical Fu Xingning, she could no longer avoid the battle. Otherwise, she would be suppressed to death. Recalling the roots of Timu, when Koahara was still an ordinary person, she was a botanist. She was determined to study and protect plants, and her original talent was also related to transforming plants. Timu root is an extremely rare desert plant. It grows in the desert, but this grass can grow as big as a tree. Its leaves and grass stems are few and thin, but its roots are extremely developed. Not only does it grow very fast, but it is also hard and tough. After Chihaya Kawahara's transformation, this plant has grown even more astonishingly under the effect of natural source power. Chihaya Kawahara almost threw the seed in front of her body. The fat seed swelled up like an explosion, and countless roots entangled and grew. In midair, it instantly became big, and countless roots penetrated into the ground, and then grew more rapidly, covering Chihaya Kawahara completely. It was almost like a seed turning into a towering tree. The huge roots formed a shield in front of Chihaya Kawahara in the blink of an eye, and the shield continued to grow as time passed, getting bigger and bigger. In the distance, the frost streamline maintained by the source crystal spear blade dropped from the sky to the earth. Where the streamline swept, the 5-meter wide ground was directly frozen into an ice road. Then the remaining source power spread to both sides, and the area of 10 meters on the left and right was also frozen into icicles in the extremely low temperature. Fu Xining's attack did not give Chihaya Kawahara more than 3 seconds to prepare. The frost source power streamline came from the sky, and the crazy growing wood roots were entangled together. When the frost source power descended, the outermost wood roots were instantly frozen, and then turned into ice slag, and scattered under the shock of the source power. But the frost source power streamline did not sweep by this time. Fu Xining held the source crystal spear blade in the low air. She stopped her body and aimed the winter pen at Chihaya Kawahara. In the consuming confrontation, Temujin grew rapidly, but the speed of freezing and shattering was even faster. Half of the wooden root shield, which was more than 10 meters thick, turned into ice slag in the blink of an eye, and the other half began to freeze. Fortunately, Kawahara Chihaya continuously input natural source power into it. This energy supply prevented Temujin from dying, but instead grew outward at a faster speed. This confrontation seemed to be deadlocked, but there is no doubt that Kawahara Chihaya was at a disadvantage. The source power of the peak of the 6th gold level warriors is as vast as rivers, but Fu Xining's energy all comes from the core of the Mingjie armed forces. Fu Xining does not have to worry about energy consumption, so she squanders it unscrupulously. But at this moment, Kawahara Chihaya may have been escaping all the time, and she also had accumulated anger in her heart. She did not choose to retreat, but use the source power to activate the characteristics of Temujin, allowing it to grow wildly and wantonly. At that moment, the entire forest was distorted and blurred due to the agitation of the source power. The endless fluctuations pushed the air away, and the tearing shock made the surrounding soil and trees fly wildly. That scene looked like a duel between spring and winter. On the twisted roots of the wood, the frost source power that brought the cold winter announced death. On the other side, the natural source power that symbolized life and spring flashed clear green, constantly injected into the flourishing wood roots, allowing its roots to continue to expand and grow, maintaining a thickness that was enough to isolate the terrible cold of the frost source power. The grass and trees continued to grow, but the frost spread quickly, freezing them hard, and finally flying wildly under the shock of the source power, turning into debris. Fu Xining, who was in a state of armed, stopped in midair. The azure source power flow line was endless, without any movement from her, and without any consumption. She just looked forward, staring at Kawahara Chihaya's increasingly embarrassed scene. Compared with machines, humans do have a gap that people have to admit. Kawahara Chihaya maintained the Tamu route in front of her, but the speed of the plant's growth could only ensure that her defense was not penetrated. No matter how much source power she injected, she could only defend herself in the end, but could not have any impact on Fu Xining in midair. This situation can be declared 100 times stronger than Kawahara Chihaya. After all, letting a Xianji envoy attack recklessly is a very scary thing in itself. Kawahara Chihaya refused to admit defeat. She gritted her teeth to maintain the plant shield in front of her, obviously unable to let go of the fact that she had been suppressed and beaten. Don't underestimate me. Just at this stalemate, when she was about to reach a dead end, Kawahara Chihaya gritted her teeth and began to mobilize the power of the source in her body, just like the end of the foreshadowing of the movie, officially entering the climax of Iron and Fire. As Kawahara Chihaya made up her mind, her source power rose, and at the same time, the clothes on her right shoulder suddenly broke, revealing her entire shoulder. At this moment, in the right shoulder of Chihaya Kawahara, a seed growing in her bones was emitting a green light. Chihaya Kawahara was born because of her original talent and her obsession, or madness. When she reached the peak of the 3 blue steel rank, she did not fuse the source crystal of the wild beast into her body like others did, but chose a seed of the disaster plant and implanted it into her body. This pioneering move, which has never been done before and will never be done again, is indeed an extremely risky move, but Chihaya Kawahara's madness supported her, and she went through everything and succeeded. She created a brand new path for mankind, which she personally named Resurrection, Nature Envoy. Of course, as the first realm warrior who relied on the disaster plant to condense the source crystal, her success was a coincidence, but more of it was the arrogance given by confidence and knowledge. The abilities of the disaster plant are varied, so when the seed is implanted into the body, the position is not fixed, but it needs to comprehensively consider the nature of the seed itself and the physical condition of the realm warrior. For example, the amount of nutrients needed, the blood flow rate, the source power exchange rate. These conditions and needs determine the location of the seeds of disaster. But this is not the end. The disaster plant will grow in the flesh and blood at first, but as time goes on, it will get closer and closer to the bones, and finally erode the bones, and grow on them. At the 6th gold level, Resurrection, Chihaya Kawahara's body has a disaster plant seed called zombie flower that has long grown into the bones. If the disaster seed is not activated, ordinary people cannot see it deep in the flesh and blood, but where the disaster seed grows, there are obvious traces on the surface of human flesh and blood and skin. On Chihaya Kawahara's right shoulder, a Y-shaped pattern penetrates deep into the flesh and blood. There is a small round hole in the center of the pattern, revealing the flesh and blood, as well as a trace of tender green plant buds. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 486 Outbreak. Fu Xineng, don't underestimate me. Kawahara Chihaya was completely enraged by Fu Xineng's suppression. She violently released the source power in her body and forcibly accelerated the growth rate of the woodroot. Kawahara Chihaya relied on the rough release of the source power to bring herself a few seconds of free time. She finally had the opportunity to release her true power. Suzayang Kanzan. As Kawahara Chihaya activated the source of blood in her body, it was like a real source of power bursting out of her eyes. The emerald source power continued to flow in her body, and extremely vigorous vitality seeped out of her body. This huge amount of vitality did not return to Kawahara Chihaya's body, but all drilled into the center of the Y-shaped pattern on her right shoulder. Under the urging of this vitality, the small plant bud began to glow. Like the sound of a heart beating, the emerald source power continued to vibrate, and a small flower bud quickly formed between the small buds. Then, the flower bud opened, and in the center of the small flower, a seed made of source power floated in the air. This zombie flower seed made of source power did not even require Kawahara Chihaya to make any movements, and it naturally floated into her hands. Kyansan Timu Panjan. Kawahara Chihaya held the seed made of source power in her left hand, and then suddenly raised her hand and slapped the Timu root that had already unfolded in front of her. At that moment, the seed formed by the source power melted into the inside of the Timu root. The Timu root that swallowed this power began to expand instantly, and began to grow wildly and uncontrollably. The scene was just like putting the roots of plants under a magnifying glass. The Timu root that was originally as thick as an arm instantly became as thick as a thigh, and then became as thick as a human waist. Each root expanded dozens of times, and the growth rate became completely uncontrollable, just like a crazy surge, like a tide. Driven by the terrifying natural source power, the entire Timu root seemed to be alive, and it began to grow unscrupulously. The frost source power flow line was still freezing and crushing its front end, but it could no longer stop the roots at this time. It was just like a sleeping wild beast waking up. The Timu root, which was only 4 or 5 meters long, actually grew to a length of 40 or 50 meters. A few seconds later, the roots as thick as human waists continued to entangle and extend. The roots in front of Kawahara Chihaya quickly changed from a huge shield to a whole wall. And this growth is still continuing. A few minutes later, the Tamu root spawned by Koaharachaea under Susayankai Anson was like a wild beast that devoured nutrients and continued to grow. The Tamu root, which was originally 4 or 5 meters long, expanded nearly 100 times, and countless roots entangled to form a huge mouth. The frost flow line continued to freeze the rapidly growing roots, and the broken ice debris piled up high. Of course, even though the growth rate and size of the Tamu root were increased by nearly 100 times, its plant characteristics could not be avoided. The frost source power continued to freeze and crush the roots growing from the front. Although the roots maintained the defense line, it was still impossible for them to counterattack Fuxining with the roots. Midnight frame source energy barrage. Fuxining frowned and looked at the Tamu root that had turned into a wild beast. She used the source energy barrage again. As she spoke, lead ball-sized source energy shells flew out one by one. 24 source energy shells were all bombarded into the woods that looked like an ugly monster. Boom. 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 The growing roots were scattered all over the place. As they grew, they spread from different directions. The source energy barrage began to touch them in midair. After the explosion, the roots within 10 meters were cleared, but the broken roots grew again almost in the blink of an eye. The next source energy shell had no room to move forward, but directly hit the newly grown roots and exploded with a bang. It must be said that Fuxining still underestimated the specialness of Koaharachaea. The beast-like Tamu root expanded too fast, and countless roots grew wantonly, just like countless ugly claws, reaching forward. If it is said that the Tamu root that accepted the Kyanson seed became unscrupulous, then Fuxining's barrage bombing successfully stopped its lawless signs. But unlike before, more than 100 macrosource crystal missiles, in the end, none of them could get close to Koaharachaea. This meaningless attack should end. At this time, Fuxining was sure that the frost rays gathered by the source power were no longer meaningful. Facing roots with such a growth rate, it is impossible to penetrate without excessive attacks. After all, it is a plant. It can continue to grow. And don't think that Koaharachaea just let Temujin block the front. As long as she wants, he can change at any time, even turning into a ball and wrapping himself inside. Fuxining can only break through the surface with a point, and the destruction speed is greater than the growth speed of Temujin, so as to finally penetrate Koaharachaea's defense and kill her. Sure enough, any apostle of the desolate god is not so easy to deal with, even if she is not fully awakened. Fuxining originally had no intention of defeating an apostle so easily. The light of the source crystal gun blade in her hand gradually dimmed, and the winter breath pen that lasted for more than 10 minutes was finally ended by her. It's ready. Start the second half. Fuxining's face showed no expression, just put down his right arm, raised his head, and prepared to rush into the sky. However, at that moment, the earth collapsed. The scene looked like countless giant octopus arms stretched out from the mud. The ground under Fuxining's body suddenly cracked, and dozens of huge roots broke out of the ground in the huge circular range. These roots had been waiting for an unknown period of time, and how long they had accumulated strength. Under the control of Koaharachaea, those dozens of arms extended directly to a height of nearly 100 meters. They directly passed over Fuxining's body and built a huge cage from above her. Almost all of the huge roots did not attack Fuxining. These plants controlled by Koaharachaea seemed to have life. They wrapped and extended layer by layer, from the top of her head to the surroundings, surrounding Fuxining. Occasionally, one or two roots hit Fuxining, but were completely blocked by the source energy field shield around her. The source energy field shield of the Mingjie armed can be recondensed after being broken, and Fuxining suffered a loss before, so she will definitely pay attention now. Since the source energy field shield is not so easy to break and can be quickly restarted, Koaharachaea simply gave up the goal of direct killing and instead let dozens of roots imprison Fuxining. Chapter 487 Destruction. These roots built a huge birdcage-like prison, and their growth speed was so fast that it made people's scalps numb. After waiting for a long time, they completed the formation almost in a breath. Due to the existence of the source field shield, the roots could not touch Fuxining, but they did not intend to attack her directly, but surrounded Fuxining. Koaharachaea's plan seemed to be like wanting to wrap the sphere with cloth. The plan was exactly the same as before, but Koahara Chihaya Runda, resurrection of the blooming, was obviously completely different from before. Layers of roots extended and entangled under Koahara Chihaya's control. Koahara Chihaya knew the power of Fusining, so she was more cautious. Koahara Chihaya, who did not need to defend, converted all the growth power of the Tamu roots into the growth power of the roots, and completely wrapped Fusining in midair. Boom. 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 Fusining is now launching an attack, as if at full firepower, but Koahara Chihaya's long-planned attack is obviously not so easy to deal with. She had failed once before, so this time, she completely corrected the previous mistake. Fusining, don't think that this time will be the same as before. Koahara Chihaya controlled the growth direction of the Tamu root. She looked at the roots that gathered like a hill in front of her, and a cruel smile appeared on her face. At this moment, Koahara Chihaya spread out her right hand, and in her palm, a small mushroom with the color of flames was lying quietly. This mushroom, which Koahara Chihaya had high hopes for, looks small and even a little ugly. But Koahara Chihaya is very confident. In the state of Resurrection Kyansan, what she gives to the seeds is not just source power catalysis. There is also a majestic vitality. Kyansan destroying explosive mushroom. Koahara Chihaya clenched her right hand, and the emerald energy mixed with amazing life force gave birth to the small red mushroom. In the blink of an eye, the plant called the exploding mushroom began to expand, as if it was resurrected, and the emerald natural energy wrapped it up, forming a round sphere. It's over. Chihaya Koahara gritted her teeth, threw the rapidly growing exploding mushroom in her hand forward, and then began to run away without looking back. At this moment, Chihaya Koahara really used all her speed. Driven by the source power, her speed was almost comparable to that of Fusining before. The sound of sonic boom rang around her, and Chihaya Koahara's figure left the vicinity almost instantly. The exploding mushroom wrapped in the natural source power sphere flew straight like a meteor, without any deviation from the predetermined trajectory. In the blink of an eye, it flew to the edge of the root cage that imprisoned Fusining, and then flew in through the gap, like a pinball, straight to the bottom. And all this happened within 4 or 5 seconds after Fusining was trapped. Fusining slashed and attacked in the root prison. She was getting higher and higher, but the root prison didn't know how many roots there were, and there were almost endless layers. Chihaya Koahara is going to fight to the death, using so much source power, to give birth to the Tamu root. Fusining fired another round of source energy shells, but the result was disappointing. Fusining dodged the spreading Tamu roots all around, and continued to move upwards. At the same time, she put away the source crystal gun blade of the breath of winter moon in her right hand. Following her mental signal, the weapon module changed rapidly. The right arm weapon turned back into a palm, and the shoulder armor that was cut down was retracted again. However, just when Fusining was about to launch other attack modules of the Mingjia weapon to completely rush out of the root cage, she suddenly felt that there was an energy eruption right below her. "What is this?" Exclamation mark. At that moment, Fusining's pupils suddenly shrank, and she blocked with her arms in front of her, and then, flames and shocks came together. Boom boom boom. The moment the explosion came, the whole forest seemed to be shaking, and the huge source of power collapsed, and unfolded in the air very close to the ground. Then the explosion rose up like a bud that had broken out of a cocoon, and finally formed a huge mushroom cloud. It was a gorgeous pattern made of flames and destruction. The earth collapsed almost in an instant. The terrible power spread around in a circle. The trees were blown into pieces in the flames, and then flew all over the sky, burned into ashes by the flames. The air became scorching hot, and the huge pressure drop caused a strong wind. The explosion was extremely violent, but it only erupted all its power in an instant, and it did not last long. But at that moment, within a kilometer of the explosion as the center point, a large pit nearly 100 meters deep appeared on the ground. Within 3 kilometers around the explosion, all the trees disappeared in the shock wave of the explosion. The grass and trees flew into ashes. The fallen leaves disappeared, revealing the dark ground. Koahara Chihaya, who had already run 3 kilometers away, looked at the huge hole caused by the explosion with a smile on her face. She used her mental power to search carefully, but she did not sense the existence of Fusining. After the explosion, there was a flat ground, and almost anyone could see it clearly, but there was no Fusining. Just died like that. Koahara Chihaya carefully checked the possible places where Fusining might be, but did not find any trace of her. Finally, Koahara Chihaya thought for a moment, and rushed towards the big pit. Theoretically, at that moment, Fusining was trapped by the root prison, and then the explosion of the explosive mushroom unfolded inside. At that moment, the confined space made the explosion more powerful, and the attack that Fusining might eventually withstand might be more terrifying than the external effect of the explosion. Although the source field shield has a strong protective ability, it is completely impossible to block such a powerful explosion at that moment. The attack just now can be regarded as the limit of Koahara Chihaya. The explosion with a diameter of 1 kilometer, which exploded in mid-air, can cause a large pit hundreds of meters deep on the ground. Koahara Chihaya is not bragging. She feels that the explosion effect of the explosive mushroom just now is completely comparable to a small nuclear warhead, or even a little stronger. What's more, the place where Fusining is the center of the explosion. The high temperature of nearly 1 million degrees will consume all the oxygen, and the explosion pressure will cause a person to burst inward directly and turn into a pile of minced meat. There was nothing on the ground or in the sky, which meant that Fusining had not escaped. If she was in the pit, then basically, she would be dead if she had suffered the damage from the explosion. Thinking about the context of everything, Koahara Chihaya started to run very fast, but when she was about to reach the edge of the pit, she slowed down and deliberately made her footsteps louder. In Koahara Chihaya's hand, a seed of the Tamu root was ready. The source power permeated the seed, and as long as there was danger, the defense would be deployed instantly. Chapter 488, The Picture of Technology. With such extremely thorough preparation, Koahara Chihaya gradually approached the edge of the pit with a diameter of 1 kilometer and a depth of nearly 100 meters. Especially in the last section of the road, Koahara Chihaya walked very carefully. She walked to the edge, looked down at the situation in the pit, and was ready to fight back at any time. However, the attack that Koahara Chihaya was worried about did not come. Looking around, the hemispherical pit had no cover, and everything was clear. Under the sun, the pit still had a burning breath and was empty. There was no grass, and there was nothing to block the view. Is he really dead? Koahara Chihaya repeatedly confirmed everything in the pit, and even turned to look at the other side. In the end, she could be sure that Fusining did not exist in the pit. No trace left. Koahara Chihaya thought for a long time, and felt that it should be, because the power of the explosion was too great, and Fusining had been completely blown to death. As for the breath of winter moon, it was estimated that no one knew where it was blown away. Anyway, it would definitely be impossible to find it. Hey, you've delayed me for so long. You deserve to die, right? Koahara Chihaya took one last look at the pit, sneered at Fusining who had turned into ashes, and turned to leave. Fusining, this huge threat, has been wiped out. There will definitely be more resistance from humans, but without a leader like her, there is nothing to worry about. However, she cannot return now to complete her awakening, because the cup of the Star Dragon has not been found yet, and this hidden danger needs to be dealt with immediately. It's really troublesome. Koahara Chihaya felt a little unhappy thinking about this, but there was no way. Trouble is always connected with trouble. But at this moment, there was suddenly a strange sound of wind. Koahara Chihaya's mental power was always open. When the airflow changed, she accurately captured the abnormality and responded immediately. The previous carelessness had long been thrown to the ground. The first moment Koahara Chihaya noticed the abnormality, she turned her head suddenly and took out another seed of the Tamu root. At that moment, just as Koahara Chihaya turned around, a stream of air rushed up from the bottom of the pit, with a vague outline, and gradually approached her. Invisible? Koahara Chihaya had already noticed all this, and her eyes suddenly became terrified. She waved her palm, and several claw vines suddenly sprang out from the ground, and rushed towards the suddenly approaching figure. Boom. 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 A muffled sound like hitting glass came, and before the claw vines made any entanglement, they had already shattered in an instant, and turned into ice chips all over the sky. Fusining. Koahara Chihaya raised her head and saw that right above the empty space, a transparent figure regained its color. The scene was like an unfolding scroll. Little by little, from the side to the front, the hidden girl showed her posture again. Environmental simulation device, light refraction, visual deception. Koahara Chihaya couldn't believe the scene in front of her. She had never heard of it, and no news channel told her that humans could actually achieve invisibility with blind arms. Of course, this is not perfect invisibility, it is just a visual deception close to it, but being able to achieve this level of environmental mimicry, as well as the shielding effect on mental detection, is not far from invisibility. Koahara Chihaya could not imagine that the imagination that humans had dreamed of for centuries appeared in front of her. She was shocked by the dark armor on Fu Xineng. But the next second, the huge sense of crisis made Koahara Chihaya's hair stand on end. Because the distance between the two was too close, and there was nothing around, without any cover. At that moment, Koahara Chihaya did not hesitate at all, raised her hand, and launched the defense of Temujin. But before Koahara Chihaya took action, Fu Xineng had already moved. Dark armor surpass. Fu Xineng's skin was red at this time, because of some kind of potion. She did not hesitate to turn over her last trump card, and showed Koahara Chihaya the strongest state of dark armor. At that moment, all the inscriptions on Fu Xineng's Myanjia armor named Breath of Winter Moon lit up instantly, and every piece of armor flashed with color. As if light had arrived, the giant beast roared. The overloaded Myanjia armor's various module systems overclocked and output all ability values, and the overall attributes of the body were improved by 100%. In the Myanjia armor named Breath of Winter Moon, all the hidden power finally broke out. The blue streamer lingered, and the ice blue mechanical armor completed a dazzling transformation in an instant. The most ingenious side of technology was revealed at this moment, like war, flowing with metal and flames, and as shocking and dazzling as a painting. At this moment, the Breath of Winter Moon, like a roaring beast, activated all modules to the limit. It was not 1 + 1 = 2, but all linkage, drive, and strengthening, and the output power became swift and terrible. Source energy inscription technology is a mysterious and profound new generation technology. The creations it creates are great creations that resonate with the human soul and are in tune with the body. Midnight Frame Transcendence is to release all its abilities and in an instant gain power beyond its own limits. At this moment, Fu Xineng obtained this kind of power and even did not need the control of thoughts. The source crystal core of the dark frame arms naturally operated the terrifying energy, and the speed of gathering was terrifying. Koahara Chihaya. The Breath of Winter Moon was in the overload mode of Midnight Frame Transcendence. The gorgeous source power surrounded Fu Xineng. The girl gathered her hands on her chest, and the power gushing out of the source crystal core began to gather in her hands. It was as if a huge vortex was forming, and the frost source power weaved and constructed the power to destroy everything. In front of Fu Xineng, Koahara Chihaya, who found that Fu Xineng activated Dark Frame Transcendence, woke up from the shock instantly. She decisively deployed the defense of Temujin, but this time, she did not hide behind the defense, but let the roots woven by Temujin entangle and interfere with Fu Xineng, and turned around and ran. Run. Must run. If you can't run out, it's over. At that moment, Koahara Chihaya's mind was only about running away quickly. She didn't even dare to look back, and just ran forward with all her heart. At this time, Fu Xineng, who was in the state of Dark Frame Transcendence, gathered strength in both hands, and the entangled roots of Temujin grew wildly and stretched out to her again. But this time, it was different from before. The power of the source force vortex gathered in front of Fu Xineng's chest was too huge. The wind caused by the source force blew, and those growing roots were twisted and crushed in the storm of source force before they even approached Fu Xineng. Chapter 489 The Falling Guillotine. In the state of transcendence of the dark frame, the speed of the source power that Fu Xineng attracted was more than twice as fast as normal. The frost source power surged out from the core of the source crystal and merged into a source power sphere between her hands that seemed to breed a storm. Transcendence warm winter sigh. At that moment, Fu Xineng pushed forward, the power compressed to the limit between her hands. The sphere formed by the frost source power drew a pale white track in the air and rushed straight towards Koahara Chihaya. At this moment, there was no grass growing within 3 kilometers, and everything walking on it was exposed. Koahara Chihaya ran towards the distance with all her strength. When the source power sphere in Fu Xining's hand was completed, Koahara Chihaya, who was charging at full speed, had already run 1 kilometer away. However, when she felt the approach of a fatal threat, Koahara Chihaya did not run anymore. It was not that she didn't want to run, but she really couldn't run away. No matter how fast she ran, could she be faster than the flying speed of the source power sphere? That huge destructive energy has not only lethality, but also a huge range. At that moment, the desperate Koahara Chihaya took out 3 seeds of Temujin in a row and directly injected the vitality of the origin into them. The huge consumption made her a warrior at the peak of the 6th gold level, pale. But the effect of the 3 times of Kaien's and Timu Panjin was indeed far beyond imagination. In almost a second, the crazy growing roots completely wrapped Koahara Chihaya's body, followed by roots as thick as a person. It expanded and grew 3 times crosswise. The next second, a ball of frost source power flew over and hit the barrier built by Temujin in an instant, and then, the power of winter and destruction exploded. The explosion of fire always reminds people of destruction and destruction, but at this moment, when the huge amount of frost source power exploded, what can be seen is not the expansion explosion, but the tearing storm that spreads from the heart to the surroundings. Boom. It was as if a storm of frost descended, and the twisted centrifugal force and the frost arrived at the same time. The outermost layer of Temu root was almost instantly frozen into ice, and then torn into ice powder. The source force continued to vibrate, and the centrifugal force was like a rotating blade, sweeping everything around. And this was just the beginning of the explosion. What followed was the terrifying source force that froze everything, just like the rampage of a giant beast after waking up. After the initial long cry, the power of the giant beast was truly exerted. There was no destruction with a diameter of 1,000 meters, but the frost storm still froze and tore everything within a diameter of 500 meters. It's over. Fu Xining floated in the air in the distance, quietly watching everything happening in front of her, and she had already had the result in her heart. The midnight frame transcendence state was ended by her the moment the source martial arts was released. This overclocking and overload mode is not suitable for continuous activation for a long time. It puts too much pressure on the user's soul and spirit, not to mention that she is now seriously injured. It should be over. Fu Xining, who was wearing a mute armor, scanned carefully twice before circling in the air. After the icy storm ended, Fu Xining flew to where Koahara Chihaya was, floating quietly in the air. At this moment, because of the rampage of the Sigh of Warm Winter, although Koahara Chihaya used 3 seeds of the Temujin, and used a lot of vitality to promote the birth. But in the end, Fu Xining's charged attack still caused devastating damage to them. All of Koahara Chihaya's abilities come from special disaster plants, but the life of plants also comes from seeds. Although developing plants generally passively protect their seed cores, Fu Xining's all-out attack still penetrated the defenses of the 3 Temujins, directly destroyed their 3 seed cores, and stopped the reproduction of roots. In fact, if the 3 seeds of the Temujin are really fully developed, they can expand into a small mountain. At that time, perhaps Koahara Chihaya can really stop the warm winter sigh. But unfortunately, Fu Xining and Koahara Chihaya were too close. Even though Koahara Chihaya tried to distance herself later, the source martial arts arrived too quickly and did not give the 3 wood roots time to develop, but directly tore them apart with destructive power. Koahara Chihaya created this profession by herself, and she was not good at fighting. It can even be said that, if Koahara Chihaya had not been angered by Fu Xining and had shrunk underground, their battle would have become a war of attrition, endless wrangling, and finally until the oil ran out. Fortunately, Fu Xining used the stealth mimicry ability of the Mingjia armor to win herself an opportunity. This opportunity to get close was indeed perfect. Koahara Chihaya also turned the forest within 3 kilometers into a white land. It was really her own fault. When the ice storm dissipated, Koahara Chihaya was in a miserable state at this time. Before, she surrounded herself with 3 wood roots, and then the warm winter sigh burst, quickly destroying the plants wrapped around her from one side. As a result, it now looks like a hemisphere made of plants has been bitten by someone, and the bite has reached the core. The huge fan-shaped gap started from the explosion position and went all the way to Koaharachahaya's position. Koaharachahaya, whose defense failed, was submerged by the explosion of frost source power. At this time, she was lying on the ground, and the left half of her body was missing, as if she had been bitten. The rest of her body was completely frozen and turned into a whole block of ice. Not to mention normal people, even for a realm warrior, this kind of injury is a sure death. Koaharachahaya's left hand and left leg turned into red ice chips in the frost storm and scattered all over the ground. Half of her body was gone. Through the ice that froze her, you can even see the color of her internal organs. Although her head is fine, this kind of injury can be said to be dead. She's not dead, yet Fu Xingning confirmed Koaharachahaya's current situation through the life detection device. She was not dead yet, but at the same time, she was not far from death. The eighth apostle of the god of desolation, you should go and accompany your brothers and sisters. Fu Xingning fell from mid-air, swung his right arm, and the mechanical armed module began to move and deform. Within a second, the source crystal gun blade unfolded again, and the source crystal at the center of the gun blade lit up, slowly accumulating energy. At this time, Fu Xingning did not get too close to Koaharachaheya. Even though Koaharachaheya looked dead, Fu Xingning was still on guard. She switched the source crystal gun blade to sniper mode 100 meters away and recklessly gathered attacks that were enough to penetrate the building. Koaharachaheya, goodbye. At that moment, Fu Xingning raised the gun blade, pointed it at Koaharachaheya's head, and moved her finger in the dark armed, and fired a source energy projectile like an electromagnetic cannon by pulling the trigger. Chapter 490 Vegetative. Ding. The crystal-like ice blue bullet flew out from the center of the gun blade like a meteor. There was almost no delay at a distance of 100 meters. The bullet almost smashed Koaharachaheya's head at the same time as the sound. However, at that moment, a root suddenly stretched out from the ground. The ugly claw vine was like an open palm, straightly touching the source energy bullet in the air, detonating the bullet, as if to die together, but it was also blown to pieces. Don't you admit defeat? Fu Xingning really didn't expect that Koaharachaheya still had the means to fight back. Obviously half of her body was gone, and it was all frozen. Death was imminent. How could she still move? Thoughts did not affect Fu Xingning's movements. Without the slightest hesitation, the source energy bullets began to fire continuously. Fu Xingning's body rose into the air again. At the same time, the bomb bay behind her opened, and 24 source energy shells flew out. Boom. 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 The frozen Koaharachaheya was still lying there, and Fu Xingning's bombardment exploded in that small area. But at this time, countless roots seemed to emerge from the ground, and at the same time the ground turned over, and the ground under Koaharachaheya was actually lifted up directly, and then turned upside down, and her body went into the ground. Pointless hiding. Fu Xingning temporarily stopped attacking after discovering that Koaharachaheya had disappeared. In her sight, the turned soil was full of plant roots, which looked particularly creepy. What was even more weird was that at this time, the feedback on the virtual screen of the Mayangia armed was that Koaharachaheya's famous signal had completely disappeared. In other words, the eighth apostle of the desolate god, Koaharachaheya, just died. It's so coincidental, is it possible? Fu Xingning thought this was a big joke. She saw Koaharachaheya activate the plant to protect herself, so how could the life detection device show that her signal disappeared? This was definitely an abnormal situation. Could it be? Fu Xingning felt that things were getting more and more abnormal, so she changed her direction and stopped monitoring human life signs, but instead observed all life signs. It was precisely because of this choice that Fu Xingning saw that the huge life network under the ground had been built. The existence under the ground was not the life of a human, but a plant with extremely surging vitality. Its roots spread everywhere underground, and in a short period of time, it formed a network that extended to nearly 1,000 meters around, and in the center of that network, a life form that had been annihilated was reviving. In the monitoring panel of the Mayangia armed, Fu Xingning saw a huge vitality gathering in the center of the plant wrapping, and she saw a dead human. who was slowly recovering his vitality. Could this be a zombie flower? Fu Xingning had already raised her position, and the monitoring panel of the Mianjiaram showed that in just 10 seconds, a dead realm warrior returned to the brink of death, and finally, perfectly recovered his body. Fu Xingning knew that the disaster plant that Chihaya Kawahara transplanted into her body was a seed called zombie flower. Zombie flower is a parasitic plant. After completing its growth cycle, it can even completely control the parasitic organism. Boom. At that moment, in Fu Xingning's monitoring interface, the node that gathered vitality suddenly began to move. The earth cracked under the impact, and a terrifying figure broke out of the ground. It was like a hammer hitting a war drum. After a roar, the excessive force penetrated the earth, and Chihaya Kawahara, who regained her vitality, drilled out from the ground. She looked ferocious, full of hatred and pain. Kawahara, Chihaya? Fu Xingning floated in the air, looking at Chihaya Kawahara's appearance at this time in disbelief. Finally, she knew why the Mingjia armed forces detected that state. At this moment, Chihaya Kawahara was floating in the air. Most of her left half of her body had disappeared. But as a replacement, countless plant roots had penetrated into her broken flesh and blood, connecting her body and providing her with life energy. Chihaya Kawahara should have been basically dead after taking the warm winter sigh from Fu Xingning's midnight frame transcendence. But at the last moment of her life, Chihaya Kawahara drove the source of her power, the seeds of the zombie flower, a plant of disaster, into the ground, and used the remaining source power to support her defense, trying to resist Fu Xingning's attack. The result was obvious. Chihaya Kawahara was unable to withstand the attack in the end. Her body was almost torn in half, and she died completely. In fact, if Chihaya Kawahara used all her power to protect herself, even if her natural source power was not good at defense, the probability of resisting Fu Xingning's attack would be very high. But Chihaya Kawahara always liked to win by wits, and the result was that she lacked courage when she was desperate. Therefore, Chihaya Kawahara was terrified. She was afraid that she could not withstand the blow and would die completely, so she injected the disaster plant in her body and used her remaining source power to resist with all her strength. But it was precisely because the seeds of disaster were injected into the ground by her that Chihaya Kawahara had a backup plan. When she was on the verge of death, the seeds of disaster underground pulled her into the ground, and the characteristics of the zombie flower made up for her injuries. That was undoubtedly fatal damage, but Chihaya Kawahara's backup plan worked after all. Because of this, Chihaya Kawahara looked like this. The roots of the green plants on her chest and back had connected to the blood vessels, injecting powerful source power and vitality into her body. Chihaya Kawahara's half-destroyed body was completely replaced by plants to replenish her previously lost vitality. Even the green vines woven into a pair of huge wings behind her looked quite extraordinary. Fu Xi, now let me show you the real use of the zombie flower. Kawahara Chihaya's voice was extremely shrill at this time, as if she was wailing her own pain. Her body was wrapped in roots, and half of her body was covered with plants. At this time, she was really considered a vegetable. Kawahara Chihaya now only had a small half of her body that still retained human flesh and blood, and the rest was all parasitized and filled by plants. No one likes this state of themselves, and Kawahara Chihaya is no exception, so her mood can be imagined, and her voice has completely changed. I'm already immortal. At this time, Kawahara Chihaya seemed to have turned into a monster made up of half plants. Just imagine, a plant grows rapidly inside a human body, with stems and blood vessels coexisting, and the roots of the plant spread all over the body, even the internal organs. Chapter 491 Crown of Winter. It can be said that at this time, Chihaya Kawahara obviously no longer meets the definition of human. She is both a human and a plant. As for the ability of plants to recover, I believe no one will doubt it. It is impossible for humans to recover from broken limbs, but for plants, let alone one or two broken branches and leaves, even if the root system is damaged, as long as it is not completely dead, it can slowly grow and recover. This infinite recovery characteristic, coupled with the vitality of the natural source force, has made Chihaya Kawahara in the state of resurrection bloom, close to the state of immortality. not to mention broken limbs. Even if the liver, spleen, stomach, lungs, all rot into mincemeat, it doesn't matter. Even if the heart is broken, it doesn't matter. Plants can completely replace these functions, allowing Chihaya Kawahara to continue to live. When a person is not afraid of damage to any part of the body, and physical trauma has no effect on her, then what is the combat power of this monster? Of course, Chihaya Kawahara, who lets the zombie flower completely take over her body in the state of resurrection bloom, is not without any weaknesses. For example, the most important part of her body is the seed of disaster. The entire zombie flower grows and survives with the seed as the center. Once the seed of disaster is destroyed, the source of Kawahara Chihaya's power will disappear, which is basically equivalent to direct death. Kawahara Chihaya is now in a state of half plant and half human. The zombie flower has changed from the original host state to the parasitic state. At one point, the seed at the core of the disaster plant is destroyed, and the entire parasitic state is of course over. The power and ability obtained in it will of course be lost. The source of power is destroyed, and the warrior itself is basically finished. Another weakness is to destroy Kawahara Chihaya's brain. In order to maintain her thinking ability as a human, Kawahara Chihaya's brain must be a part that is forbidden for zombie flowers to enter and parasitize. Therefore, once the brain is damaged, Kawahara Chihaya, the person, will die. Without her thinking ability, the disaster plant is just a plant. Of course, this does not mean that the disaster plant that has changed from a host to a parasitic state will die. As long as the seed of disaster is not destroyed, the disaster plant will not die. On the contrary, after the human who controls it dies, the disaster plant will eat the parasite as a whole, obtaining huge energy and vitality. Afterwards, the disaster plant without human control will no longer have any thoughts, and it will completely become a disaster plant. What remains is only the reproduction and growth ability of a normal disaster plant, as well as aggression. The seed of disaster that has lost its owner is like a mad dog that has lost its owner. Because of the infection of human souls and source power, the disaster plant itself already has some consciousness. When the owner dies, it will become crazy. If it is not handled well, it may be a disaster. Fusining. Now, I'm immortal. At this moment, Kawahara Chihaya, who has lost half of her body, has a miserable expression. She pressed down her only remaining right arm, and the ground within a kilometer around her seemed to be overturned by countless shells. Countless huge roots sprang out from the ground. Each root, the diameter is more than 2 meters, and the length is close to 100 meters. They are like spears piercing the sky, madly stabbing Fusining in the air. The monitoring interface of the Myanmar armed forces allowed Fusining to see the growth of these roots very early, so she had already made preparations. In the humming air, Fusining's body suddenly rushed into the sky. After more than 150 meters, Kawahara Chihaya's roots could no longer attack her. The situation is troublesome. At this time, it seems that Fusining is already invincible, but if you think rationally, things are not that simple. At this time, Kawahara Chihaya, who was parasitized by the zombie flower, has half of the characteristics of plants. The huge plants under her can actually be regarded as part of her body. Moreover, these densely packed roots can not only pierce the sky to attack Fusining, but they can also go deep into the ground to absorb nutrients. What's more, this is a forest, and the natural vitality and nutrients in the soil are almost endless. As long as there is enough time, Kawahara Chihaya can even spread the roots over dozens of kilometers around. As long as the seeds of disaster of the zombie flower in her body are not broken, and her brain is not rotten, Kawahara Chihaya can recover from any injuries, and her source of power is almost endless. It is easy to imagine how much trouble it would be to fight against Chihaya Kawahara in this state. What Fusining had to do now was to break through Chihaya Kawahara's defense and crush the seeds of the zombie flower in her body. Hehe Fusining, the situation has reversed. Chihaya Kawahara also knew her own weaknesses, so at this time, she, who had become half plant and half human, did not attack immediately after discovering that Fusining had risen to the sky, but began to quickly gather the roots on the ground to build a defense. In this case, it was Fusining who could not continue to consume, because she was able to hold on to the battle now, because of the effect of the potion. Once the effect of the potion wore off, she would probably die directly. Sure enough, we still have to fight hard. Fu Xingning looked at the terrifying plants that were gathering on the ground and casually cancelled the source crystal gun blade and began to stretch her hands to the left and right. Crown of Winter. At that moment, with Fu Xingning's order, the back wheel wings of her body suddenly detached and began to rise. The wheel wing named the Crown of Winter is larger than the entire body of the Breath of Winter Moon. The entire wheel wing is in the shape of a snowflake, inlaid with hundreds of frost source crystals. There is a large circle on the wheel wing, and 3 lines are equally divided and intersected in it. At the midpoint of the intersection, an extremely large source crystal is inlaid. The edge extending from it becomes 6 prismatic tips on the outside of the circle. The Crown of Winter began to change rapidly as it rose. Countless parts that were gathered began to unfold. The gaps between the various parts became larger and larger. The source crystals that connected them flashed an icy blue cold light, as if something huge was gestating in it. And with the injection of terrifying energy, the unfolded wheel wing began to rotate gradually. Driven by the torrent of energy, the wheel wing turned faster and faster, and the huge energy began to be gathered. Finally, in front of the Crown of Winter, which had unfolded to more than 10 meters, a huge source force sphere was gathered. Midnight Frame Wing Frost Strike. When the energy continued to reach the peak, Fu Xingning folded his arms that were stretched out to the left and right, and then clenched his fists and pressed them against his chest. The next moment, between the 10-meter wheel wings that unfolded like snowflakes, a source energy sphere with a diameter of 3 meters emitted a stream of source energy light from the front end. The frosty source energy streamlines fell like sharp arrows, piercing straight into the huge hemispherical shield formed by the roots gathered on the ground. Chapter 492 Stealth. When the streamline of the source force began to burst out with power, all that could be seen in the sight was just a dazzling ice blue light. The light was too strong, and it seemed to eclipse the sun in the sky for a moment, and the source force fluctuations that broke out afterwards even produced shock waves that were strong enough to tear the earth apart. In order to borrow the power of the earth, Kawahara Chihaya chose to descend from midair, and the entangled vines began to gather around her, like a blowing gale, and began to gather. At that moment, it was as if winter was coming, and the cold air extended from the ground to the distance. Countless trees were dyed white, and were easily torn into pieces in the gale caused by the source force vibration. The intersection of the two forces was a picture that was not shocking. It was like the convergence of scorching sunlight shining on an egg. The hemispherical eggshell was pierced in the first moment, and then the scorching power penetrated into the eggshell, and the outer edge of the eggshell, starting from the point where the light shone, began to be infected by that power, and gradually turned white. There is no bottom line for the temperature of the frost source power. As the source power is injected, the temperature will get lower and lower, the hardness of the ice will get harder and harder, and the possibility of the plant's vitality remaining will become less and less. The source power streamline emitted from the wheel wing immediately penetrated the outer shell of the root protection. Then the source power continued to be injected, and the black roots began to quickly turn white. Under the influence of the source power fluctuation, they finally collapsed with a bang like a collapsed building. Around Kawahara Chihaya, nearly 1,000 thick roots wrapped into a protective hemisphere, but when the wheel wing behind Fu Xingning unfolded, the terrifying source power streamline was directly shot, and finally all of them were frozen, and then shattered in the source power shock. The scene of the collapse was like a wreckage. When the snow wheel wing cannon ended the source power streamline, the place where Kawahara Chihaya was before had completely turned into ruins. The defense formed by the tree roots was completely defeated, and the ground was full of broken limbs and arms. Under the effect of the frost source power, the area within a radius of 3 or 4 kilometers completely turned into a winter scene. The low temperature also covered the heat source of life, but the enemy search module in the dark frame armed forces is not only an infrared system, but also the perception effect of mental power, so that nothing can escape Fu Xingning's search. However, at this time, Fu Xingning did not sense the position of Kawahara Chihaya. Hidden again. Fu Xingning knew the power of the snow wheel wing cannon very well. The attack just now was definitely not enough to kill Kawahara Chihaya. After all, it was not full power output. Fu Xingning's plan was to use the source power streamline to penetrate Kawahara Chihaya's defense first. Then, Kawahara Chihaya, who had lost her defense ability, would definitely fight against the source power. After determining Koahara Chihaya's position, the stalemate of the source power confrontation made it impossible for Koahara Chihaya to change her position. Finally, Fu Xingning would let the wheel wing cannon fully unfold and even launch Dark Frame Transcendence to overload and annihilate Koahara Chihaya in one fell swoop. But now, Chihaya Koahara's defense was penetrated by the snow wheel wing cannon, but she seemed to have died in the bombardment just now. This is absolutely impossible. Fu Xingning can be sure Chihaya Koahara will never die, and there must be something wrong with her disappearance. Crown of Winter Sudden Rain. Because she noticed the problem, Fu Xingning did not choose to descend to check. She did not hesitate to transform the unfolded wheel wing to attack. At this moment, hundreds of frost source crystals embedded in the wheel wing lit up, like hundreds of source crystal guns with triggers pulled, and the frost source energy bombs became real. Zauru bombarded the ground. The tree roots that had been torn into pieces in the freezing were hit again, and the pile of limbs that were piled up were completely broken into pieces under the bombardment of tennis-sized source energy bullets. The flying ice dust was everywhere, and the pile of limbs that was originally a ruin was like a mound of earth washed away by a rainstorm, and even the shape could not be supported. As the pile of debris that blocked her vision disappeared, Fu Xingning was able to see the scene on the ground clearly. There was a conspicuous pit at the place where Koahara Chihaya had stopped before. The pit was not big, but the depth was unobservable. She ran away. At this time, Fu Xingning finally understood what Koahara Chihaya was planning. All signs showed that Koahara Chihaya had no intention of confronting Fu Xingning head-on. She actually dug a tunnel underground and changed her position directly. Her defensive posture was all fake. She woke up from near death and did not intend to use her full strength to fight Fu Xingning head-on. Her habit of sneak attacks made her choose to hide at the first time and then wait for an opportunity to act. Time is running out. At this moment, the choice before Fu Xingning was a bit of a dilemma. In theory, as long as she stayed in the air, Koahara Chihaya on the ground would not be able to hurt her, no matter where she hid. But on the other hand, as a natural user of resurrection, Koahara Chihaya can also absorb the vitality of the trees in the forest and restore herself to a perfect state, while being parasitic by the zombie flower. If the stalemate continues, she can be said to be invincible. And if Fu Xingning decides to return to the ground at this time, then in terms of combat, Koahara Chihaya will have the opportunity to attack, and Fu Xingning herself may really turn over. But if she stays in the air like this, it is impossible to find Koahara Chihaya's trace. Perhaps, in fact, it is best for Fu Xingning to leave now. But, she is actually going to die, and it is meaningless to leave or not. She is not important. What is really important is Gluo and crossing Ruo. Today, she must kill the 8th apostle of the desolate god, Koahara Chihaya here, and only in this way can Gluo and crossing Ruo be absolutely safe. Since we are all going to die anyway, let's just use ourselves as bait. In the cold wind, Fu Xingning, equipped with the Mayan gear armor, stayed in the sky. After a brief hesitation, she lowered her flight altitude. The Mayan gear armor, named Breath of Winter Moon, not only has the most advanced source energy inscription technology, but also its system is equipped with the most advanced artificial intelligence in human scientific research. This artificial intelligence has basically understood Fu Xingning's behavior patterns through continuous learning and running in. All the control parts that Fu Xingning ignored are made up by artificial intelligence. Because of this, at this time, Fu Xingning does not need to concentrate her mind on the control of the Mayan gear armor. Any subtle places that need to be adjusted will be solved by artificial intelligence. The auxiliary effect of this artificial intelligence also allows Fu Xingning to have more energy to search for possible traces of Koahara Chihaya. Why? I have a very bad feeling. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 493 Hiding. In order to find Koahara Chihaya, Fu Xingning has lowered the altitude to 5 or 6 meters, and the monitoring panel accurately displays the information of the depth of 300 meters underground. But what is very disturbing is that there is still no trace of Koahara Chahaya. At this moment, there is no longer any living organism around the location where Koahara Chahaya was before. Any living thing that can survive, whether it is human or plant, always has a cycle of vitality and energy, which is spread throughout all parts of the entire life body, so that the life body can survive. This entire energy cycle constitutes a life body. But at the location where Koahara Chahaya was before, there were only broken vitality points scattered all over the ground, which were basically broken and killed roots, scattered around the surrounding area, but there was no threat. After confirming the safety of the surroundings, Fu Xingning landed on the ground. She looked at the big pit dug by Koahara Chahaya when she escaped and activated the module specially used for tracking. Hawk module activated. Following Fu Xingning's order, the two folding modules buckled on her waist flew up to the left and right, and then assembled in front of her to form a simulated machine similar to a hawk. After the transformation was completed, the hawk mechanical body began to move inward along the big hole at an extremely fast speed, and disappeared from Fu Xingning's sight in the blink of an eye. At this time, on the virtual monitoring panel in front of Fu Xingning, the overview of the entire winding downward passage could be clearly seen. Fu Xingning herself knew that the direction where Chahaya Koahara wanted to hide in the state of zombie flower parasitism must be a place with the vitality of trees. But now they are in the forest, and Fu Xingning cannot determine the specific direction. She can only rely on this method to track, hoping to find Chahaya Koahara's forward trajectory. Even if she is moving forward in the mud, Chahaya Koahara's speed is really amazing. The entire dug passage is winding and undulating, and the hawk mechanical body cannot move forward in a straight line, and can only move forward in twists and turns. Fu Xingning stared at the monitoring panel, carefully looking for Koahara Chahaya's traces, concentrating on thinking about Koahara Chahaya's possible location. And just at this time, when Fu Xingning's attention was all focused on tracking Koahara Chahaya, 8 dark green vines slowly emerged from the ground that had been hit by the frost source energy bomb. The 8 vines were very thick and very soft, just like some kind of mollusk. It slowly approached Fu Xingning and gathered around Fu Xingning from 8 different directions. Fu Xingning had been staring at the interface captured by the hawk mechanical body, but she did not really ignore the surroundings as she seemed to be. She landed at such a low position, in fact, just a fish. At that moment, Fu Xingning, who noticed the movement around her, was startled and stepped on the ground without hesitation, preparing to take off directly. However, at the moment, when Fu Xingning responded, the 8 vines spreading around her suddenly burst out at a speed that even Fu Xingning could not see clearly. 8 soft and tough vines met above Fu Xingning's head, quickly intertwined and tied a knot, then changed direction, and went down again. Within microseconds, a net appeared in front of Fu Xingning, who was rising into the air. Fu Xingning rushed into it, and found that the vines that touched the source field shield were extremely soft and stretchable. The soft net stopped her on the spot, and the force was extremely huge, like a spring constantly feeding back the force, making Fu Xingning unable to rise into the air. The source field shield around Fu Xingning did not react at all when being attacked. These vines had no way to break through it, or they did not intend to break through it. The 8 soft vines quickly wrapped around Fu Xingning at a speed visible to the naked eye, like a net, covering Fu Xingning and the source field shield. And soon, more and more countless dark green vines stretched out from the ground. They could not cause any harm to Fu Xingning, but they wanted to keep Fu Xingning at all costs. What kind of plant is this? How can it be so sharp? In the monitoring panel in front of Fu Xingning, red reminders were rolling. At this time, the dense vitality gathering phenomenon was spreading under the ground within 200 or 300 meters around Fu Xingning. It was unimaginable that the broken vitality that Fu Xingning thought was broken tree roots was quickly gathered together like a house made of bricks. The originally trivial vitality almost gathered into a small river, winding and long. And this gathering scene was put into reality. What unfolded in front of Fu Xingning was a rolling of the surrounding ground and rocks, and countless broken tree roots, which gathered together under the interweaving of vines. It was like dark green vines formed bones, and the broken tree roots became flesh and blood. At this moment, in Fu Xining's eyes, a snake made entirely of plants, and with a head bigger than a whale rose from the ground. The head of the vine root snake stretched out from the ground. Under its body, the earth was rolling and shaking. The composition of vines and roots was still gathering. Its body continued to extend, and the snake head crossed the earth, and rushed straight towards Fu Xining. At this time, Fu Xining was still protected by the source field shield. Although she was trapped by the net composed of countless vines, the source field shield was not penetrated, and she was not hurt. Facing the 40 to 50 meter long plant snake, Fu Xining did not choose to break free or escape. She just floated there, with no fluctuations on her face. Koahara, now, I can't find where you are, but as long as you launch an attack, as long as you want to penetrate my source field shield, you must show up. For this possibility, Fu Xining did not break free, did not escape. She chose to face the huge vine root snake in front of her. Fu Xining was gambling and waiting. She was gambling that Koahara would appear, waiting for Koahara to expose herself. Mingjia warm winter sigh. Fu Xining did not immediately activate the Mingjia transcendence. She just gathered her hands together on her chest. The source crystal core of the Mingjia armed radiated light, and the surging power began to gather in her hands. The azure frost source power gushed out from the source crystal core, as if a huge vortex was formed. Fu Xining, holding the frost vortex, stared at the vine snake rushing towards her. There seemed to be a glimmer of light in her blue eyes. She was waiting and looking for it. At this time, the mollusk-like vines were frozen by the dissipated frost source power. These plants, which were not hard, but had super long flexibility, were gradually covered with white frost. With the sound of thin ropes, they began to break, and break one by one. Time is running out. Chapter 494 Design. It's time to end. In the white ground, that was already stained with frost, Fu Xining, wearing a meditative armor called Breath of Winter Moon, held a source force sphere in her hands that seemed to be gathered by a storm. The frost source force weaved to build the power of destruction. When the nearly 50 meter long vine root snake opened its mouth to bite her, Fu Xining gritted her teeth and pushed the power compressed to the limit in her hands forward. At that moment, the sphere twisted by the frost source force drew a light white track in the air and went straight into the huge mouth of the vine root snake. The green snake woven by vines and tree roots intended to swallow Fu Xining in one bite. When its huge head was only 4 or 5 meters away from the girl, the source martial arts called Sigh of Warm Winter entered its mouth and instantly exploded in the throat. Boom. At that moment, it was as if the winter of the entire area was gathered and compressed into a sphere. When the frost source power exploded, it was as if a storm of frost descended, and the twisted centrifugal force and frost arrived at the same time. The inside of the fugigen snake's body began to be stained with white frost, and the cold air moved inside along the passage, like the flames produced by the explosion wandering in the corridor of the building. The air pressure rolled, and a huge cold current poured out. The coldness descended, and the vibration of the source power continued to unfold. The centrifugal force was like a rotating blade, sweeping everything inside the fugigen snake's body. The huge plant snake finally only touched the source power field shield outside Fu Xining's body, but at the same time, its middle body collapsed. The head of the fugigen snake was disconnected from the body, and the cold current spread upwards, completely freezing the whale-like head. When the source power oscillated, the cracked wood turned into ice dust all over the sky. At that moment, Fu Xining turned her head, as if she had sensed something. In the distance of her sight, a woman named Koahara emerged from the earth, and countless plants surrounded her like a throne. This revival naturalist who was parasitized by the zombie flower held a short spear made of 2 plant roots in his hand. The green source power halo was wrapped around the short spear, and it turned into a stream of light as Koahara threw it. The thrown short spear seemed to have crossed the space. When Fu Xining saw it being thrown, it had already come to her front. There was no way to dodge. Ding. When the short spear made of 2 plant roots hit the glass bubble-like source power field shield, it did not rebound or shake off. The short spear seemed to be stuck on the source power field shield, and the tip stayed on the outermost layer. Then, the green source power glow lit up, and the wooden short spear untied the intertwined form from back to front, and rotated like dancing. from the tail end to the tip. And when they were fully unfolded, at the point where the tip of the short spear touched the source power field shield, the traces of cracking on the ice surface spread. Catcher. A crisp sound rang out, and the source energy field shield shattered without any fireworks. Kyansen's Yuli gun. In the distance, Kawahara Chihaya, who was in a plant state, whispered softly and told Fu Xingning with her mouth shaped the source martial arts that broke the source energy field shield. And this is also the prelude to the end, as the pinnacle of human source energy inscription technology today. The source energy field shield of the Breath of Winter Moon does not require any extra time to rebuild. It can be rebuilt within 6 seconds of the source energy field shield being broken. But at this moment, the defense module that constructed the source energy field shield actually had a strange energy disorder, and the construction of the source energy field shield was forcibly interrupted and could not be repaired immediately. Kawahara Chihaya, is this the trump card you are looking forward to? Fu Xingning, finally here. 1 or 2 kilometers away, Kawahara Chihaya looked at the source energy field shield around Fu Xingning that was broken and failed to be rebuilt, and couldn't help showing an excited smile on her face. At this time, Kawahara Chihaya's whole body was wrapped in plants, and the missing left half of her body was also replaced by plants. Her left hand was replaced by entangled vines, and her right hand was also covered with armor made of plants, and her nails turned into claws, blooming through the bloody forest of death. In the hoarse roar, Kawahara Chihaya's face was full of ferocity. She pressed her hands forward, and the ground in front of her seemed to turn into waves. The soil churned up, and fishy green plants sprang out from the ground. Only the stems of these plants were soft, and the front ends were all sharp blade-like hooks. They drilled out from the ground and spread forward in front of Kawahara Chihaya in a fan shape. All the trees along the way were torn to pieces, and sawdust filled the sky. But the strange thing was that Fu Xingning, who was wearing a black armor, did not choose to take off when faced with the strange plants piercing the ground. Without the protection of the source energy field shield, Fu Xingning didn't care at all. She stopped there. If it weren't for her calm eyes, people would even think she was scared. On the other side, Kawahara Chihaya was also surprised by Fu Xingning's choice. She was inexplicably upset that she stayed there calmly. She narrowed her eyes in confusion and was a little alert. Puff, 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 like a forest of spears piercing from the ground. The strange vines continued to grow, forming a 1,000-meter long river, which was completely a super large AoE aura. Facing this type of source martial arts, avoiding it should be the best choice, but Fu Xingning stopped there motionless, making people doubt her plan. However, something very interesting happened. Fu Xingning's choice was really correct. The blood-piercing dead forest released by Kawahara Chihaya only spread over more than 200 meters in front of her, and was still a long distance away from Fu Xingning. Of course, Kawahara Chihaya released the blood-piercing dead forest not just for the sake of looking good. This source martial arts has a 2-stage skill mode, and what she wanted was actually to force Fu Xingning to rise into the sky, and then, what a difficult birth. Although Kawahara Chihaya was a little angry that Fu Xingning did not rise into the sky, this did not affect her subsequent plans. So, Kawahara Chihaya raised her palm, and the thousands of strange plants stabbed forward, and this huge piercing force directly threw out the hooks at the front of them. This is Kawahara Chihaya's real purpose. Each of the wooden thorns at the front of these plants is poisonous, and the distance they fly out can reach 400 or 500 meters. When these wooden thorns form a numerical advantage, they will become a piercing rain falling from the sky. Facing the large-scale rainstorm formed by thousands of wooden thorns, Fu Xingning still did not move. She floated in the air more than 10 meters above the original place, and there was no wavering in her eyes. Kawahara Chihaya, The Journey to Hell, I'm Alone, Too Lonely. Chapter 495 Cut. Mingjia Cheoiu. Fu Xingning announced the release of the Mingjia Armed Forces word by word. At that moment, all the inscriptions on the girl's Mingjia Armed Forces, named Breath of Winter Moon, instantly lit up, and every piece of armor was flashing with color. It was as if light had arrived, and a giant beast was roaring. The various module systems of the overloaded Mingjia Armed Forces began to overclock and output all their capabilities. The source of frost surged out from the core of the Mingjia Armed Forces, surging like a raging sea river, lingering around Fu Xingning. Winter Moon Breath Fully Armed Module, deploy. At that moment, the Mingjia armor on Fu Xining began to change rapidly, and all the armor began to fit together without any gaps. The visor attached to the helmet began to unfold from left and right, perfectly fitting on her cheek. Winter Moon Breath seemed to have turned into a roaring beast, and all modules were activated to the limit. The resulting linkage, drive, and enhancement, and the output of source power also became swift and terrifying. At the same time, the floating wheel wings behind the Winter Moon Breath decomposed one by one, and began to fit on the back armor of the Mingjia armor, turning into shining light blades. The huge source crystal at the core of the wheel wings was embedded in the back of the back, and the 6 tips of the snowflake-shaped wheel wings were all unfolded and combined together. Finally, behind Fu Xining, a pair of huge light wings unfolded. In the Mingjia Transcendence state, the Winter Moon Breath with fully armed modules unfolded. Like a messenger of winter, the light wings behind it are composed of source power, and the colors of the mist and glory are so beautiful that people are intoxicated. At this moment, the power presented by the Mingjia armament is the power and beauty that transcends the times when machinery, technology and source power meet. In the turbulent gale, Fu Xining, who controls all of this, clenched his fists, facing the rain of wooden thorns, and swung his hands to both sides of his body at the same time. Beyond Titan Light Blade. With Fu Xining's announcement, the ice blue and white mixed Mingjia armed, the ice blue source crystals above its two-handed armor, lit up brightly at the same time. The Winter Moon Breath under the Mingjia transcended, and the two-handed armed module unfolded a light blade that was half of the normal state. The ice blue light blade with a length of 1.5 meters shone with dazzling colors. The blade was surrounded by the mist of source power, and was virtually connected to the inscribed source crystal on the hand armor. Then, a sky full of wooden thorns arrived. Each tip of these more than 1 meter long wooden thorns was poisonous. Under the huge thrust, they attacked Fu Xining, intending to penetrate her completely. Facing this rain-like attack that covered the sky, Fu Xining did not dodge or block. She held the overclocked Titan light blade in both hands, and the light wings behind her spread out, just like that, facing the attack of the sky full of wooden thorns, straight forward. Although the source energy field shield could not be deployed, the Winter Moon Breath under Mingjia Transcendence, the surrounding frost source energy was swift and fierce. As soon as the wooden thorns approached the source energy, they were disturbed by the flow of the source energy, and deviated from the previous track. Then, they turned into ice cubes, and were torn apart by the source energy shock. The wooden thorns in the sky were not even touched by the Mingjia armor on Fu Xining's body. Fu Xining just slightly bent her body, and under the push of the 2 huge light wings behind her, she turned into a light blade, and started to move forward straight. In front of her, the dense plant community formed by the blood-piercing dead forest still stood. But Fu Xining, who was fully armed, seemed to have turned into a flying arrow. The wheel wings unfolded behind her were fixed behind her, and became sharp wing blades. These plants were just swept by Fu Xining head-on, and the protective net formed by the thorns was directly shattered, leaving only the stumps in the sky. As you wish. Koahara Chihaya looked at Fu Xining, whose speed was too fast to catch up with, and knew that she had no way to dodge. In the state of dark frame surpass, Fu Xining was pushed by the light wings, and flew in a straight line at full speed. It was simply cheating. Therefore, Koahara Chihaya no longer dodged. All she could do was to exert her full strength to fight for life and death. During the flight, Fu Xining pursed her lips with a calm expression. The dark frame armed named Breath of Winter Moon was already in a fully deployed state. The tightly fitting mechanical armor had no gaps. Even if there was no protection, the pilot in the armor would not get wet when entering the water. The light wings under dark frame surpass were fully deployed. The powerful propulsion force made Fu Xining's forward speed surpass any previous time point. The Titan light blade unfolded above her clenched fists, and the ice blue light flashed with dazzling brilliance. All these scenes seemed to be blurred in this attack. What was flashing was only the scene of Fu Xining facing the storm of wood thorns, and flying straight towards Koahara Chihaya. Between life and death, Koahara Chihaya also felt a huge threat. With such a close distance and such a fast speed, she could only fight for her life. Kyan's natural lament. With this resolute mood, Kuwahara Chihaya opened her mouth, and the natural source power gathered and compressed like a storm gathering point. The momentum of a warrior at the peak of the 6th gold stage fighting for his life was truly thrilling. Kuwahara Chihaya, who was parasitized by the zombie flower, was always enjoying the energy supply of the disaster plants, and countless roots were drawing vitality from the surrounding forests. These natural vitality turned into source power, flowing and nurturing in her body. When her shrill howl sounded, the source power sphere compressed in front of her mouth exploded, and a source power streamline went straight forward. This was the strongest attack that Kuwahara Chihaya could make in this situation. The source power streamline composed of natural source power turned into a dark green color under compression. But Fu Xingning just rushed forward like that. Facing the terrifying attack, that was enough to tear a gully for several kilometers in an instant. She crossed the Titan light blade in the transcendent state in front of her body. Swish. The source force streamlines created by the natural lamentation could be said to have instantly defeated the frost source force that lingered around Fu Xingning. Afterwards, the source force light stream hit the Titan light blade, making a sound of steel rubbing against the ground. But what was shocking was that the light blade constructed by the frost source force was like a divine weapon that had been tempered 1,000 times. Under the attack of the source force streamlines, there was no sign of collapse. Instead, it was the sharp blade that defeated the restraining force of the source force streamlines, causing the terrifying source force streamlines to disintegrate directly. The natural source force splashed like the water of a fountain, but it could not pose a threat to Fu Xingning. Asshole. In horror, Kuwahara Chihaya watched Fu Xingning approaching. She did not dare to stop the guidance of natural lament, because if she stopped, she would be giving up resistance completely. But even if she maintained the source power flow and continued to increase the source power output, Kuwahara Chihaya only slowed down Fu Xingning's speed slightly, but was unable to defeat the Titan light blade of Winter Moon Breath. Chapter 496 Return. Meet Death. Under the confrontation of the source force flow line, Fu Xingning's speed was greatly slowed down, but she was moving forward after all, and her speed was not as slow as imagined. The last 100 or 200 meters of the distance, Fu Xingning did not need a second, but she slowed down and took 2 or 3 seconds. But, after all, she crossed it. Kuwahara Chihaya, go say hello to your sisters and brothers. At that moment, the distance between Fu Xingning and Kuwahara Chihaya was closer than ever before. She looked at her for the last time, and the 2 Titan light blades crossed in front of her chest suddenly swung. Transcendence blade dance. In Fu Xingning's flashing figure, the 1.5 meter long Titan light blade seemed to turn into 2 brilliant streams of light. Kuwahara Chihaya, who had half of her body turned into a plant, tried every means to block it all. But, unfortunately, Kuwahara Chihaya could not stop the overflowing blade light. Puff. Kuwahara Chihaya had long been out of the concept of human beings when she was parasitized by the zombie flower, and even her blood was no longer pure red. Kuwahara Chihaya's green blood splashed, but was blocked by the frost source power surrounding Fu Xingning, and turned into ice beads. Fu Xingning used the extreme blade light to cut Kuwahara Chihaya in a cross shape, instantly passed through Kuwahara Chihaya's body, and stopped not far behind her. No. My god will save me. At this moment, the seeds of disaster in Kuwahara Chihaya's chest were shattered by the dancing blade light, and her upper body was cut in an X shape. Her head was connected to the upper body without arms. The internal organs and blood parasitized by the plants flowed everywhere, but Kuwahara Chihaya did not die immediately. She stared at the sky with her eyes wide open and unwilling. Sensing the death of her apostle, the original power of the god of desolation, the dark world beater, Tikatera, also began to overflow at this time, preparing to revive her. I won't die. My god will. Chihaya Kuwahara. Your god can't save you. Everything. It's over. Fu Xingning's voice was full of determination and death. She had long expected that Chihaya Kuwahara would not die so easily. After all, she was the 8th apostle of the god of desolation. Even if she was defeated and killed, she had the ability to resurrect. And Fu Xingning's last trump card was to face this moment. At this time, Fu Xingning had already felt the weakness and pain in her body. The injuries suppressed by the potion now completely broke out, almost as fast as a mountain torrent. She couldn't live anymore. With this idea of dying together, Fu Xingning, who was under the transcendence of the dark frame, completely broke out her own mental power and lifted Chihaya Kuwahara on the ground directly, as if she was pulling gravity. Every part of her, every piece of flesh and blood was not spared. Under the huge amount of mental power, Chihaya Kuwahara could not resist at all and could only be compressed like a ball. At this time, the original power of the god of desolation, like the source power of a black swamp, also wrapped up Kuwahara Chihaya, as if preparing to do something. Kuwahara Chihaya, just here, sleep forever with me. With the idea of ending everything, Fu Xingning launched the ultimate means of the Mingjia armed forces at this time. The product of the Mingjia armed forces was not actually invented by Ning Yiking, but the Mingjia armed forces in this world were created by her. Their star dragon ally Crossing Ming, who is Crossing Ruo's mother, had wandered in countless universes in her childhood. She has experienced nearly 100 billion years and visited countless worlds. In one of the worlds, the source energy inscription technology is extremely advanced, and the Mingjia armed forces is the top and ultimate power in that world. Later, Crossing Ming left that world and found his spouse among the endless stars, and they had their own children. Later, they came to the Senkan world and discovered the soul-destroying dead and the desolate gods of the gluttonous star spirits, the world eater Takatera. At that time, Ning Yiking, as the star spirit of this world, had not grown up yet, and the only ones who could fight were two star dragons and Fu Xingning, the Watcher. They failed, and Crossing Ruo's father died, but they also successfully repelled the god of desolation, the dark world eater, Takatera. In the following 10 years, Ning Yiking gradually grew up, Crossing Ruo was born, and Fu Xingning tried to contact the headquarters, but failed countless times. In Crossing Ming's narration, Ning Yiking learned about the existence of the Mingjia armed forces. Of course, she could not do it to the extent of other worlds. However, by integrating the technological power of the Senkan world, she also created the Mingjia armed forces belonging to this world. The most important and unchanging point of the Mingjia armed forces is that the Mingjia armed forces must be the embodiment of some kind of expectation of human beings. It is precisely because they want to do it and want to achieve it that humans will create the Mingjia armed forces. This is true Meng, which is the meaning and truth of the creation of a Mingjia armed forces. After the Mingjia armed was forged, true Mayan became the unique ability that could be achieved by combining all the functions of this Mingjia armed. This is the meaning of its creation, and it is also the most powerful part of this Mingjia armed. The name of this, True Mayan, also became the name of this, Mingjia armed. Mingjia armed breath of winter moon is infused with such expectations. What Ning Yiking ultimately wants to achieve is to make the whole world fall into frost like a breath of winter. True Mayan breath of winter moon, Fu Xingning, has reached the end of her life. She is powerless to complete the whole cycle, so she can only show the most beautiful frost color by self-destruction. That is the most blazing roar of winter. The cold freezes the moisture in the air into frost. All living beings are instantly deprived of the qualification to survive and turned into ice sculptures. The ice blue light is like a gestating cocoon. The huge source power fluctuation that finally pierces the sky is the last glory of Fu Xingning. With this blow, everything is silent, only the wind sings. Everything within nearly 100 square kilometers is frozen and killed. The waterfall becomes a glacier, the animals become frozen corpses, and the plants become specimens. As the guardian of this world, Fu Xingning's final death together is so resolute and majestic. She and Ning Yiking's gift eventually turned into dust under the destructive power of the energy center. However, the ice blue brilliance that shook the world made Luo, who was far away, stop, turn his head, and bow to salute. Ms. Fu Xingning, I swear to you that I will definitely hand Crossing Ruo over to Les Engzire. Chapter 497. What I saw along the way. More than 100 kilometers away, the icy blue glow pierced the sky, and the majestic source power tore out a cloud-like scenery, but its destructive power also turned everything into nothingness. Luo embraced the still sleeping star dragon Lali, watched Fu Xingning's last lost glory, then he grabbed his body and walked north without looking back. Because he was worried about the existence of pursuers, Luo had no intention of stopping. He ran for 4 or 5 hours before stopping in a planted fruit forest. At this time, the fruit forest was full of flowers, and of course there was no fruit, but GLUO had no intention of stealing fruit here. Following the path trampled in the fruit forest, GLUO found a family who planted fruit trees. He did not disturb the other party, but took advantage of the fact that no one was around, drank 2 sips of water, and began to wait for an opportunity. This world has been eroded into a sieve by the desolate god. GLUO didn't know who the enemy was, so he simply didn't show up in front of anyone. Considering the surveillance and the people who would be searched later, GLUO had been hiding from people until night, and finally got a chance. It was a truck delivering fertilizer to Gulen. GLUO carefully avoided the possible recorder on the truck, and got into the truck bed when the truck left. GLUO finally relaxed along the way. Crossing RUO in his arms, was still sleeping soundly. He didn't know if Fu Xining had done something to her, or crossing Chen Lang had a very long sleep. Although it was already night, there were no street lights on the dilapidated road. The truck turned on its lights and moved forward. There was no car along the way. Taking this opportunity, GLUO was able to observe the situation of the forest world. In terms of urban layout, GLUO's location should be on the outskirts of the city. From a distance, although there were not many people, lights could still be seen, which was better than the development of Changlin City. There were still a certain number of residents in the suburbs, which must be a prosperous city with a huge population. Only this reason can allow a certain number of people to settle down in the suburbs. Looking around, the transmission towers were neatly arranged, flashing a faint light in the darkness, as if there was some monitoring device. Apart from that, there were only desolate hillsides and neat and long farmlands in the suburbs. GLUO, who was at the peak of the 3 blue steel stage, could already see in the dark. Based on his observations, GLUO felt that the technology of the forest sky world had surpassed that of the earth world. However, GLUO was very curious why in such a high-tech world, there were such shabby roads, without even street lights. But soon, GLUO's question was answered. After the train had been running for about an hour, a toll booth appeared. Behind the bright lights of the toll booth was a flat and spacious road. Fuck, is it so technological? GLUO pulled the rain cloth in the truck bed, and covered himself tightly. He looked around through the gap in the truck bed, and everything he saw was eye-opening. The toll booths in the forest sky world are not the simple traffic jams of the earth world. There are more than a dozen entrances lined up side by side, and each one has a huge passageway that can allow large trucks and even tanks to enter directly. In the middle of the passageway is a mechanical gate that opens diagonally, and on both sides there are several retractable barriers made of solid steel as thick as human thighs. GLUO estimated that in the face of such measures, if someone does not want to pay, let alone a heavy truck with a load of dozens of tons, even the largest bulldozer used to demolish buildings cannot force its way through. Because, in some inconspicuous corners, GLUO saw heavy machine guns. It's outrageous. You have heavy machine guns at the toll booth, and they are the kind of weapons that are not concealed and directly placed on the table. GLUO estimated that there are probably many hidden weapons. This kind of steel bunker-like toll booth is simply a defensive point on the battlefield. It is impossible to take it down without a professional army using heavy firepower and then a strong attack. However, the toll booth did not question the trucks more, nor did it mean to search them. It just opened the door and let them pass. Although GLUO had been hiding in the truck bed, he could see clearly that the truck did not touch the window of the toll booth, but directly scanned something, completed the payment, and went straight through. When leaving the toll booth, GLUO quietly lifted the tarpaulin and took a risk to take a look. Sure enough, the people in the toll booth window were all armed soldiers. They did not care about the operation or collection of toll booths, as if they were simply protecting them. This world seems to be very chaotic. GLUO had seen toll booths on Earth before, so how could they be so terrifying? This kind of steel fortress is likely to be more than just the buildings above. GLUO estimated that there may be a considerable degree of buildings underground. This is completely a genuine military node. But if a toll booth becomes a military node, it would be fine if it was just one. But if all of them were like this, it would make people doubt the stability index of this world. How could a fertilizer truck, which was delivering fertilizer to the orchard, pass by military facilities on the way back? This also indirectly shows that the toll booths from the suburbs to the city in the Senkan world are all like this. But what are they guarding against with such vigilance? Gangs? Terrorists? Criminals? It's the Moraku world. No wonder it's a disaster. After GLUO had a rough analysis, he didn't dwell on this question. He hid in the rain cover of the truck and began to observe the surrounding situation. It is certain that GLUO is now walking on the highway leading to the city. There are already shadows of vehicles around him. Although there are not many, there are finally some people. Most of the vehicles are heavy trucks. The load and length of the trucks are obviously crushing the Earth world. GLUO looked left and right, as if he saw the near future. The highway is built very luxuriously. The one-way lane is more than 10 meters wide. There are 7 or 8 lanes marked. The width obviously exceeds the standard of the Earth world. It is probably prepared for super heavy trucks. I don't know what material the roadbed of the highway is paved with. Anyway, it is definitely not asphalt. It looks black with a little gray, and it is elastic. At this time, GLUO finally saw the street lights. The height of these street lights is also more than 10 meters. Although the height is outrageous, the light is sufficient. One can illuminate a large area. GLUO hid in the rain, full of curiosity about everything around him. Occasionally, he could see electronic screens on the road, with various texts displayed on them, but unfortunately, GLUO didn't recognize them. As an outsider in the Senkan world, GLUO must be out of tune with this world. He could communicate with Fusining in language, so GLUO estimated that it was crossing Yan's work. Chapter 498 Troubled Times. But what made GLUO feel sorry was that crossing Yan could only solve the language problem for him and could not let him read the text of the other world without any effort. After observing the surroundings, GLUO gradually became bolder. He quietly put crossing RUO away and sat up with a raincoat on. Such a beautiful road, such a shabby car, it feels a bit out of place. In GLUO's imagination, since the Senkan world already has stronger technology than the Earth world, it should find new energy, and the technology used in cars should also be iterated. But it is very strange that according to GLUO's observation, the cars on the road are basically internal combustion engines that burn oil. Not to mention the loud noise, there is no improvement in exhaust emissions. What can be called even more weird is that the fertilizer truck that GLUO is sitting in can be called broken and rotten, and the noise of driving even makes people wonder whether it will explode. However, no one cares about this car condition. This is no longer a problem of energy saving and emission reduction. This is completely ignoring the hidden dangers of traffic. Unfortunately, the rules of the forest world are completely different from those of the Earth world. While GLUO was complaining, the shabby trucks waggled through the toll booth that was exactly the same as before, confirming some of GLUO's previous conjectures. This world is indeed very chaotic. The word chaotic is not even a noun, but an adjective. Because, after getting close enough to the city, GLUO heard gunshots, and what was even more annoying was that the gunshots were not the bangs of pistols, but the bangs of rifles. In the truck, where GLUO was listening to the firecracker-like sound, he knew that there were definitely 2 groups of people fighting within a kilometer, and there were quite a few people with at least 20 rifles. What's more, not long after, there was a loud explosion, and a ball of fire rose up a few hundred meters away. Good guy, even rocket launchers were used. Are you sure this is not a terrorist attack? GLUO hid in the car, ready to jump out and escape at any time, but the pickup truck was obviously not panicked. Gunshots rang out not far away, and the driver actually played a rock song, which was really hot. The sound of wolves crying and ghosts howling continued all the way. The initial sound of the exchange of fire soon faded away, and the sound of sirens could be vaguely heard. GLUO huddled in the tattered raincoat and set the first rule for himself in this world. From now on, he must be ruthless, and if he wants to fight, he will kill directly and never give the enemy the slightest chance to fight back. The toll station was built into a military stronghold, and rifles and rocket launchers could be used in the edge of the city. This world is absolutely free every day. Killing and dying are probably as natural as eating and drinking. You don't even ban things like guns. Little smart guy, you must have spent all the money on family planning. GLUO could already see the scene of the city at this time. It is indeed a technologically advanced metropolis. The city neon is like light pollution. The buildings start at 50 floors, and those with more than 10 or 20 floors are considered low buildings. What impressed GLUO the most was that there were helicopters flying over the city at will. Judging from the number in the paint, they were obviously privately owned, and they flew so recklessly. The most outrageous thing was that a helicopter painted blue and black directly lowered its altitude above the road and was only about 7 or 8 meters away from the traffic. A second-generation rich man dressed in non-mainstream clothes stood in the plane and shouted like a monkey. The most outrageous thing was that he urinated directly and deliberately wet the glass of several cars. It was simply lawless and extremely bad. The gap between the rich and the poor is a bit big. GLUO had a complete education and cognition, and he understood the meaning of this scene at a glance. This kind of recklessness of the second-generation rich is no longer a situation that can appear in normal countries. At the very least, it is a situation in capitalist countries, where corruption is serious, the government is rigid and incompetent, and capital giants are above political parties. Flying planes around the city casually, like monkeys, pursuing excitement without any bottom line, such unruly behavior. No one was angry. Even though they were urinated on the windshield, the car owners did not show any resistance, but just sped up to avoid the perverted rich people on the helicopter as soon as possible. You pigs who want to get into Binchuan City, you are only fit to eat, feed and drink sewage in this life. Don't even think about dreaming about climbing up. Even if you are admitted to Binchuan University, you will always be slaves. The rich second generation, who had drunk a lot of wine, was half naked on the helicopter, shouting obscene words with a loudspeaker. The loudspeaker in his hand was very powerful and even covered the noise of the helicopter. It was obviously specially made for this situation. Untouchables. Binchuan University is not prepared for you bastards. You want to get to the top in one step, but you are dreaming. Even if I can't get into Binchuan University, you are just a dog in front of me. In the midsummer night, the vibration of the helicopter was like the whistling of the wind. Obviously, the rich second generation who had become a loser was incompetent and furious. He shouted all the way with the loudspeaker, and the helicopter carried him backwards, as if to let more people hear his speech. Damn, he's a retard. He turned out to be a loser who failed the college entrance exam. GLUO was originally very angry, but after figuring out what was going on, he was no longer angry. This kind of rich second generation must be raised as a breeding pig at home. It's really not worth having any emotions towards him. Binchuan University. Binchuan City. GLUO didn't expect that he would get the name of the city in this way. He raised his head and saw chaotic lights and neon lights everywhere. This noisy city, it seems that at night, it will tear off its disguised face, revealing the wild beast's presumptuousness and fierceness. Such a big city, I only know Ning Zinan's name. How can I find her? GLUO didn't dare to talk to Fu Xining because of the critical situation before. Now it seems that it was a bit of a failure. Fu Xining told GLUO about two most important things. First, hand over Ning Yiking's relics to her sister Ning Zinan. Second, hand over Xingruo, the star dragon Lali, to Le Zhengxia. According to Fu Xining's instructions, Le Zhengxia will arrive next month at the earliest. If it's later, it will be a long time. There's no need to rush. That is to say, what GLUO can do now is to find Ning Zinan and get in touch with her. Apart from anything else, GLUO is so desperate to deliver things, so the other party must give him some reward. GLUO is penniless and has no place to stay. He still needs a local to help him. Wait a minute. Fu Xining's words are so vague, isn't it? Not that she can choose not to say it, but that she doesn't know it either. Chapter 499 Action. Ning Yiking's sister Ning Zinan. She can't be ignorant and just an ordinary person, right? GLUO was originally full of confidence, thinking about making a big move next, but the more GLUO pondered Fu Xining's words, the more he felt that it was like a dying entrustment, reminding him to take care of himself. Ning Zinan is about the same age as you, and is still in college. Ning Zinan is about the same age as me, can't it be my appearance age? GLUO has always known that his appearance has always remained at the age of 18 and has not grown at all in all these years. When Fu Xining met him for the first time, she must have thought that he was only 18 years old. So, Ning Xinan is actually just 18 years old? Why do I feel that something is wrong? GLUO forced himself not to think too much and carefully sorted out the ins and outs of the matter in order to find his position. First of all, little GLUO sent him to this time node in this place in the Senkan world, and he must have wanted him to meet Fu Xining and run away with crossing RUO. Then, according to Fu Xining's last words, GLUO's main task now is to find Ning Xinan. If we judge according to the plot of the game or novel, Ning Xinan will definitely be in trouble. Not only can she not help him, but she also needs his help. Fuck, this world is so bad. It would be strange if Ning Xinan didn't get into trouble. GLUO rubbed his cheeks vigorously, and his mentality was very positive. The desolate god had already eroded this world deeply. The power and resources he possessed were definitely enough to rival the Quan Kingdom. In this case, it would be fine if Ning Yiking was not exposed. Once she exposed her threat to the desolate god, her family and friends would definitely be uprooted. In that case, Ning Yiking's relics should be for Ning Xinan to protect herself. GLUO dug in his pocket and took out the walnut-sized crystal. He looked at it carefully, but didn't see anything special. GLUO tried to inject source power, but was also directly rejected. I'm afraid this requires blood verification. GLUO tried to rub it again and found nothing unusual, so he put the crystal back. In the previous battle, Ning Yiking not only exposed her identity as a star spirit, but also died directly on the battlefield. The last crystal left behind, GLUO suspected that this was a blade of heaven. Of course, GLUO was mostly curious, and there was no young man who claimed it for himself. After all, the blade of heaven was a divine weapon that carried destiny. If it was not recognized, it would be impossible to use it. Now that I think about it, Fu Xining did not let me protect Ning Xinan. This was probably to leave me a way out and give me a reason to leave. The more GLUO recalled Fu Xining's words, the more he felt that she was wise. Even at the moment of death, she considered all aspects. In this world, the star spirits are dead, the watchers are dead, and the government is dead. In the end, the only one who can protect GLUO is probably Les Zengxia. GLUO took crossing RUO to find Les Zengxia. She would never abandon GLUO. Even if GLUO would eventually die, he would be the last person to die in the world. We can only take it one step at a time. When GLUO thought of the scene of Fu Xining's death, he felt indescribably depressed and sad. This world is heading for destruction. The people who might save it have died to save it. The remaining betrayers are enjoying the carnival before the end of the world. It's really ugly. GLUO picked up the sleeping crossing RUO and silently looked at the dirty and mixed scene around him. His impression of the huge city of Binshuan plummeted. At this time, the dilapidated trucks transporting fertilizers have officially entered the city. But unlike the towering high-rise buildings and neon lights in the distance, these places on the outskirts of the city look like dirty and messy slums. There are obviously buildings with lights everywhere, but in these densely packed buildings, every alley and lane seems to have become a black area full of filth, violence, insults, screams, groans, cries. GLUO hid himself in the truck bed. What he heard and saw were all the unbearableness and corruption of this city. The night sky was pitch black without a trace. The lights on the ground were dotted between the buildings. The crowds of people were moving through the city like wolves looking for food. Ding. In the noise, the right tire of the old truck suddenly made a loud explosion. The whole car trembled, and the speed slowed down instantly. After the tire burst, the balance of the whole car was completely broken. The truck bed shook violently twice. GLUO hid in it and quietly glanced at the side alley. He had a vague answer in his mind. Someone shot the tire with a pistol at a distance of about 20 meters. And this person was obviously an experienced person. He chose a good time. He forced the car to stop without causing the car to be destroyed or people to die. The bastards from the Rotten Dog Gang. They must have done this. The truck driver had already turned off the music. He stopped the truck, cursed loudly, and got out to check the tires. Those bastards who eat garbage and drink muddy water. They have never been short of protection money before, and now the president just wants to negotiate the price, so he starts doing this. The driver was obviously not a pushover. He checked the tires and confirmed that the rear tires were completely broken. He immediately started calling the boss. He held a mobile phone in one hand and a gun in the other, looking very fierce. However, the driver's cowardly performance was soon exposed by the truly fierce people. Several strong flashlights suddenly shone over, and before the truck driver could get through the phone, more than a dozen people had already surrounded him. Mr. Ida, our boss is very disappointed with your president's betrayal. The person who walked in front was about 30 years old, thin, holding a baseball bat in one hand and a half-burned cigarette in the other. Judging from his attitude, he seemed to know the driver. Although our name is not respectable, if we really act like rotten dogs, we would never be alive today. Mr. Minasawa Hiroshi. Mr. Minasawa. This is a misunderstanding, an absolute misunderstanding. Our president has no intention of betraying. He just wants to hope that your protection fee can be reduced. The truck driver was as fawning as a dog at this time. He had a gun in his hand, but he threw it to the ground without saying a word. His attitude was completely servile. But unfortunately, the people who surrounded them were not easy to deal with, especially the leader Hiroshi Minasawa, who was even more cruel. He didn't care how the driver wagged his tail and begged for mercy. He directly hit him on the head with a stick and knocked him to the ground. Mr. Ida, the matters above are the matters above after all. You are not qualified to consider. This time, our warning to you is also the last time. Resign, run away like your colleagues, or rot to death somewhere. Chapter 500, Rotten Dog. Mr. Fengs, please let me go. I understand. I understand. I will go back and resign immediately. I will resign as soon as I go back. The driver who fell to the ground was covered in blood, but he did not dare to show any resentment, but just kept shaking his tail and begging for mercy. I hope you can keep your promise this time. Fengs Hiroshi reached out and patted the driver's cheek, then rubbed the blood on his hand on his clothes, waved his hand, and turned away with a group of people. GLUO hid on the other side of the truck bed with crossing RUO in his arms, quietly waiting for the few people to leave. Then he carefully lifted the tarpaulin, turned over and got off the truck. At this time, the driver was already crying and calling his boss. He described himself as almost dying, but this last word sounded a bit full of energy. The truck was already damaged. No matter how to solve it next, someone will definitely come over. The truck bed is no longer suitable for hiding from people. GLUO actually wanted to walk to the city center again. Now it seems that he can only rely on himself. Are there any sanitation workers? This place is so dirty. GLUO zipped up his coat, put on his hood, and carefully adjusted Zingruo's posture to let the little girl sleep more comfortably. Zingruo slept very peacefully in the loose coat. The lily dragon's hair was purple blue, as brilliant as the stars. She didn't need to stimulate the source of power at all. Her innate powerful blood made the source of power manifest freely and flow through every part of her body. It's really a free country. GLUO walked carefully into the side alley because he was new here and bright places always made him feel unsafe, but these places without lights were really filthy. The ground was mixed with the stench of feces, urine, engine oil and blood, which made people feel suffocated and nauseous. GLUO covered his mouth and nose with clothes and looked around and felt extremely disgusted. In such a disgusting place, there were people who didn't care and huddled in the corner. They hummed inexplicable dreams, and their stinking bodies were covered with festering wounds. They all deserved to die. GLUO originally wanted to leave directly, but the compassion left by the orderly society made him lean towards the people on the ground, and the conclusion he came to was so hateful that his teeth itched. I don't know what these people have experienced in the past, but they are not worthy of sympathy for taking drugs to this point. But even if they have become the scum of society, no one will care even if they die. But no one, no group, is qualified to remove their organs and then throw them here to die. It's simply cannibalism. GLUO's face turned pale. He looked around the alley and found that there were about 8 people. All of them had some non-lethal organs removed and then thrown here to wait for them to die and stink. GLUO didn't quite understand why these half-dead people were not killed directly, or the usable organs were removed and then disposed of like dead pigs. This kind of non-lethal organ removal must have its own rules. After all, the reckless behavior of some people is within the framework of being able to skin and dismember people. Damn, this dead pig is so heavy. It's obviously a worthless life, but it chooses to hold on. Just sell a kidney, and we have to carry it all the way. At the other end of the alley, a chaotic sound of footsteps suddenly sounded. Two people, one in front and one behind, carried a fat person, cursing as they walked. The person in the lead was obviously used to this road. He didn't even turn on the flashlight and walked in the dark. At that time, the person behind him almost slipped and hurriedly apologized. "Mr. Furubata Hiroshi, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I will pay attention next time. Fushimaki, you've been in our rotten dog gang for 2 days. Why are you still so clumsy?" Although he was just taking the newcomers to deal with the pigs, Fushimaki's words still had a greedy face. His words sounded very gentle at this time, but in the ears of Fushimaki behind him, they were just like the whispers of the devil. "Mr. Fushimaki, I have spent all the money on me. I will definitely treat you to a few drinks at the izakaya on the day when I get my salary." No, Fushimaki, there's no need to be so scared. I don't mean to do anything to you. I just want to have a good talk with you. Fushimaki's smile was disgusting at this time. He took Fushimaki to the side of the alley, threw the fat man he was carrying to the ground full of garbage, and ignored him. "Mr. Fushimaki, are you just throwing him here? The wound on his body has just been sutured. If he gets infected with germs..." "Fushimaki, you are really kind. However, kindness is the least thing in this world." Furuta Hiroshi took out a cigarette from his pocket, and before he could take out his lighter, Futanimaki had already lit it for him. "Futani-san, you are much smarter than yesterday. However, you are still a little too ignorant, so ignorant that it is intolerable." "Mr. Furuta Hiroshi, Futani-san, do you know who these people are? Debtors? I heard they couldn't pay back the money, so they were punished." No, they are not human. They are the scum of this world. Gambling, drug abuse, theft, robbery, rape. They do all kinds of evil. When Furuta Hiroshi talked about these people on the ground, his voice seemed a little unfathomable. Futanimaki listened to his words and couldn't tell whether it was right or wrong for a while. "Mr. Furuta Hiroshi, since these people are hopeless, why should our rotten dog gang lend them money?" Because of the rules. Do you understand the rules?" Furubata Hiroshi exhaled a puff of smoke and let out a hoarse laugh like a crow, looking very satisfied with his teaching. "The souls of these people are no longer savable, but their bodies are still alive. As long as they go through some procedures, they will be qualified to become seeds that help others. So, we will lend them money and give them the capital to start a new life. This is a rare opportunity. If they seize it, they can live a good life, but if they still insist on not repenting, in order to make a living, in order to survive, we have to recover our costs. We sign the contract in black and white, and organs will absolutely be removed with the consent of the debtor, and the executors are all certified medical practitioners who abide by the rules, and will never cause death." Furubata Hiroshi raised his foot and kicked the fat man who was knocked unconscious by heavy anesthetics on the ground, as if to show his kindness to the pigs. "Futani-san, we in the rotten dog gang are very trustworthy, just like those bastards in the hyena gang." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.